All right, we're on the chair, or we're on the air, Mr. Chair. We're ready to begin whenever you are.
Okay, let's call this meeting to order and to a pledge of allegiance. Pledge of allegiance
Allegiance
to the
to
flag
the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation indivisible with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Need coverage, David? Are we on?
Yes, thank you. Montecito Planning Commission hearings are televised live on County Santa Barbara Television, CSB TV, Channel 20 at 9 a.m. in the South Coast, Lompoc, San Ynez Valley, Lompoc, and Samaria and Orchid areas. Rebroadcast of Montecito Planning Commission hearings are on Fridays after 5 p.m. on CSB TV, Channel 20. Today's hearing will also be streamed live on the website, county website, and will be available for download in a day or two. Would you like me to move on to roll call?
Yes, please.
All right, Commissioner Keller,
Present.
Commissioner Miller,
Present.
Commissioner Kupiec,
Here.
Commissioner Senauer,
Here.
and Chair Police.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. So David, do you have 5 as well? The reconsider of the circumstances of the COVID-19 state of emergency?
So I can just read that into the record, and I would just maybe defer to Ms. Plowman or Mr. Wilson to give the county's update and recommendation on that. So this
Okay.
is to reconsider the circumstances of the COVID-19 state of emergency, to consider whether or state or local officials continue to impose or recommend measures to promote social distancing, find that the legislative body has reconsidered the circumstances of the state of emergency and that the state or local officials continue to impose or recommend measures to promote social distancing, and direct staff to continue to notice and hold hearings as remote hearings consistent with Government Code Section 54953E3.
Okay, agenda status report. Mr. Wilson, are you there?
So, Mr. Chair, if we go back to item 5, the director and myself continue to recommend that as of today, the Montecito Planning Commission consider and make those findings and direct staff to remain remote for another 30 days. We do need a motion and action on that. We know that things are changing at the state and local level. As of today, we recommend we continue to make those findings, and we'll brief the commission going forward. If we could get a motion and action on item 5, that would be perfect.
Okay. Do we have a motion from
I so move.
Susan?
Second motion.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, when we're remote, we should do.
Oh,
roll
yes. Sorry.
call. Though I appreciate the enthusiasm. Commissioner Keller,
Aye.
Commissioner Miller,
Aye.
Commissioner Kupiec,
Aye.
Commissioner Senauer,
Aye.
and Chair Police.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
So, Mr. Wilson, are you back?
I'm back. Thank you.
You're not quite back. You don't sound back.
Like 50% back, I guess. So status of our agenda, we have 2 items on the standard agenda. Both are from Long Range Planning Division, the Comprehensive Plan Annual Progress Report, and then their work program and report on housing related matters. So there's only 2 items on the agenda. Staff is ready and prepared to present on those. Just a matter of procedure. Item number 12 doesn't require any action. Those are just noticing requirements that we have to do. So we only actually have 2 items on the agenda, the standard agenda. I can move to the projection report, Mr. Chair, if you'd like.
Yes, I just, since the agenda is kind of thin, I thought maybe we might be able to allow some discussion, if we may, about the sound walls that were presented to the public in Montecito, but maybe we just make comments when the chance comes for people who did listen in, but I wouldn't mind having a small conversation about that.
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, my recommendation on that is if the commissioners have informational items, they can present that during
Okay,
the informational thing. If there's members of the public that want to speak of items that aren't on the agenda, they can do that during general public comment. However, we're not agendized to have a discussion or question and answers to staff on that today. My recommendation is we are still getting information
yeah,
and a complete application from the Caltrans. Once we get more information, I recommend that we would agendize it for a fuller discussion at that time. As of today, it's not agendized, and I don't recommend that we have a discussion on it today.
okay. All right. So shall we proceed?
Could I ask an informational question, follow up on this?
Please.
Mr. Wilson, would this matter come before us, or does this go, because it's, my understanding is that 101 project was a multi-jurisdiction project, so it went to the county planning commission. I would love for it, but I thought we were not necessarily a stop on the train.
Just really briefly, so again, as we're not agendized for this conversation, but as a refresher, Commissioner Miller through the chair, this is a regional project and it is going to be going before the County Planning Commission as part of the Regional 101 HOV expansion project. However, as we indicated at a prior meeting, we will be coming back to the Montecito Planning Commission to brief the commission and have a discussion with the commission once we get a complete application. But it won't be for action. It'll be as a briefing item to the Montecito Planning Commission.
Okay, so Ms. Keller, do you have a comment? You want to take we can't hear you.
Unmuting, thank you. Thank you. I raised my hand because I was actually going to try to cover this during the commissioner's informational reports, since I had raised the issue with you and with Secretary Wilson. But I just wondered if everyone else found Mr. Miller's comments as garbled, if the audio is garbled as I did, or if it's just my computer.
No, it sounded fine.
I didn't hear it very well either.
Oh,
Okay,
Sorry to say.
yeah,
Yeah.
so,
I think I
Yeah.
got the gist of what Marcia was saying, but not all. Mr.
We
Miller.
shouldn't rule out that the garbling was actually the computer. Oh,
but once again, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
there's cutting in and out for me. And
Me
I don't
too.
know anything you can do if it's affecting other people as well. Thank you. So see what you can do, please.
Okay, let's proceed. And we'll have comments later about the sound walls. Go ahead, Jeff.
Okay, Mr. Chair, Commissioners, projection report is going to be very brief. Our next hearing is March 16th, and there's no items projected. However, I do recommend that we don't cancel at this time, depending on what happens with the COVID-19 local or state determination of emergency. We may need that hearing date to either make a finding of going remote. And if things change before then we'll let the commissioners know and we can cancel it if necessary. But that's all I got right now for the projection report.
Thank you. All right. Proceed. I got to. Okay, shall we move on then? The informational reports, or do we have public comments first?
Mr. Chair, there is no one here to speak for public comment, and just for the record, we didn't have anyone for public comment for item number 5 either.
Okay, thank you. All right, information reports. Does someone want to start? Susan, Mr. Keller? Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Police. I wanted to bring to the attention of the public, because hopefully the public is watching, that I had made a request through you and through Mr. Wilson to have the sound wall excuse me, situation and the update be discussed as an informational briefing at the meeting today. And Mr. Wilson's response, and I may ask you to reiterate that, please, Mr. Wilson, because I've been getting a lot of comments. People are quite disturbed that this has been a decision made without any public input, that taxpayer dollars are supporting the freeway expansion, and yet the taxpayers seem to have nothing to say about how it's being done. And they believe that the Planning Commission has a chance for input on this, and it's hard to understand why we might or might not have much meaningful input. So if you would please, Mr. Wilson, re-clarify what your response to me was and make it clear for the benefit of the public how the process goes. Yes, indeed, it does go to the county. Yes, indeed, we are advisory, but why is that the case? And where is the public opportunity to have meaningful input on this issue? So I'm sorry, that was a question to you, please, Mr. Wilson.
Sure, Mr. Chair, I'll answer whenever you would like me to answer, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that you only have so much gas in your tank, Mr. Wilson. So I know that voice is thin. So you can give us the most important message right now. Thank you.
Commissioner Keller, to the chair, to preserve what is left in the gas tank. Currently, staff is working with the applicant, which is Caltrans, and also in connection with Public Works Department. We have an application in, it's incomplete. This information is new as far as the sound walls. We're currently waiting for them to submit a redesign or more information. As of right now, we don't have any information to provide to the commission, as this is information that is out in the public, but it hasn't been submitted to the county for review and process. So right now it's really operating on rumors and some information that hasn't been submitted to the staff to review and process. We're working with flood control, Caltrans and Public Works on the issue of the sound walls. Nothing has been decided, nothing has been determined. My recommendation for the public is that they can contact the staff planner, supervising planner, Nicole Liu, and she can provide guidance and direction on the status of the project and ways that the public can be involved in this process.
Yeah, I want to, before you make comment again, Ms. Keller, I wanted to let you know that I'm in copy here of an email that was sent to Caltrans by Public Works, and which they were blindsided as much as we were. The comment made last week by the design committee that the county was the culprit behind the change. Culprit wasn't the word they used, but was instrumental, was a little misleading and just flatly not true. There is no data that's been turned over to support or otherwise let anybody know how they can reach this conclusion. And in fact, flood control cannot provide, as they say, meaningful feedback for either Caltrans or to the community regarding the impact of flood hazards caused by the proposed sound walls, because they don't have the data that Caltrans was using. And so they didn't share it. And so this was supposed to be a collaborative report, and unfortunately it hasn't been. And so I think flood control is going to be the first line of defense for the public. It's the local agency that will let us know what FEMA's flood control lines, what changes that might happen. I was blindsided as well. I was on the design committee for 6-9 months, and we did not come to this conclusion, or there was any discussion about removing all the sound walls. The idea of putting a chain link fence was something that was ruled out in the early 50s, but we decided to put it in originally. But this is I believe, a kind of a premature conclusion reached by Caltrans, but without being any more disaligned with them, I will just say at this point, we should have a report back to us when at such time after the counties had a chance to give their feedback. And this I would really hope that Caltrans would come and the whole design committee would come in front of us. It's rather unfortunate that somehow we cannot combine the neighborhood needs with flood control needs. I have my opinion that there is not an adequate flood control method of drainage on the freeway, and so causes this situation to exist. The storm systems are basically non-existing on the depressed part of the freeway under the bridges. And if they were, this problem might not be as serious as it is. But anyway, I look forward to seeing Caltrans and SBK, provide the information that should have come already to flood control and public works. That's my comment.
If I could follow up, thank you. That's very helpful and very informational, because it's quite, and I apologize, Mr. Wilson, I didn't realize you were a little under the weather, or I wouldn't have put you on the spot in that way and asked you to speak. But unfortunately, 2 weeks ago, there was a Zoom meeting in which it was announced to the community that this was a fait accompli. There have been press releases sent out to this effect by Kristen Ayers, who is their PR person. So it looks to the public as though there has been no process. And I think it's reassuring for them to find out that there is a process in place and that there may be reconsideration of what appears to be a premature decision. So thank you for your input, both of you gentlemen.
Okay, Brian, Mr. Pettit, did you have a comment you want to make?
Mr. Chair, it's a little late now. I just wanted to reiterate Secretary Wilson's comment that we are not agendized, and comment is meant to be brief for things that are not on the agenda. But I also wanted to respond to Commissioner Keller's question to make sure the commission was clear on the issue of public participation. So section 2-25.2 of the county code is the code section that establishes the jurisdictions of the County Planning Commission and the Montecito Planning Commission. And it does give jurisdiction to regional transportation projects to the County Planning Commission. Secretary Wilson has reported that planning's intent is to bring the project to the Montecito Planning Commission in its advisory role. And then the County Planning Commission would be the decision-making body. And I just wanted to reiterate that both of those hearings would be open, public Brown Act hearings. And I just wanted to make sure that was clear for the record.
Yes, Brian, that's true. But I do remember I was at the Board of Supervisors, or actually the SBK meeting in Santa Maria, when this thing finally passed, that they would give the approval to build the freeway through Montecito. And the last thing that Salud said was that I want to make sure that the Planning Commission, Montecito Planning Commission, had at least the opportunity to put input and otherwise suggest what the public of Montecito would want, and would have no jurisdiction to approval, but it would at least have a voice in it. That was the last thing was said, Brian. So
yeah, Mr. Chair, if I wasn't clear on that, I apologize. That same section that provides decision-making authority to the County Planning Commission also specifies that the Montecito Planning Commission may provide recommendations to the County Planning Commission. So in its advisory role, it specifies that there is a potential role for the Montecito Planning Commission. It's just not a decision-making role. So that is in the county code as well.
okay, all right, thank you, Donna. You
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes. Do we have any sense of a timeline when the application may be submitted to the point where then it could come before us? Is there 6 months, a year? Is there any quantifiable sort of parameters or not?
Yeah, I think,
Mr. Wilson? Yeah.
Okay. Mr. Wilson, you want to bring that voice out of the woods here?
Or Director Plowman?
The commission is working really hard to make sure I just don't speak anymore. Commissioner Sinauer, through the chair. Right now, it's premature to give you any time. We're waiting for additional information to be submitted. Once we have that information, we'll have a better idea of what the timeline is. So that I can't opine on a timing yet until we get that information we're looking for.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Well, I could say a lot more, but Looks like our attorney, or rather I didn't, but we'll have this as an agenda item at some point, I would hope within the next 90 days, but I could be wrong. All right, so shall we move on? Let's talk about the informational reports of anybody else besides what we just all talked about. Anybody have a comment? Yes, Donna.
Yeah, they're making great progress on the underpass at Butterfly, the ADA construction. And I guess it's supposed to be done at the end of the summer, but it is a big project. And they are also putting safeguards at the railroad crossing, which they've never had. So that's extremely beneficial to the community, pedestrians, etc. The other thing is just informational heads up that it appears that both Montecito Water District and Montecito Sanitary District are working toward approving a shared feasibility study for the consolidation of the two agencies. It's been sort of in the background for a couple of years. It's come up, there's been discussions, it's gone away, and which is a big project. It's a LAFCO project. It comes before LAFCO. So the boards at their board meeting this month, I believe, will vote on approval or not of a shared feasibility study for consolidation and of the two districts, rather than an MOU or an MOA that is certainly less expensive and probably would serve the same outcome. Anyway, just a heads up on that. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, you are muted.
Sorry about that. I guess we are complete with our comments. Or so shall we move on to the minutes? Is that where we're at, David? Are you?
No, that's right. So I think that we have two sets of minutes today. It's the first is the January 12th special hearing, and then the January 19th hearing.
Okay, so do I hear any comments? Yes, Commissioner Senauer, and then Susan afterwards. Susan Keller.
Commissioner Center, you're muted.
Thank you. Thank you. No, I was just going to move to approve the minutes of January 12th.
And I will second that motion.
All right.
Shaw,
All right,
take the roll.
David, yes.
Okay, great. Commissioner Keller,
Aye.
Commissioner Miller,
Yes.
Aye.
Commissioner Kupiec,
May I just note that both Commissioner Kupiec and Commissioner Miller were absent?
correct. So I
Let
think
me
that,
amend my vote to an abstain.
great. And Commissioner Kupiec, I believe that would apply to you as well, correct? All right, Commissioner Senauer
Aye.
and Chair Palice.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0. I'm sorry, 302.
So we have to pass the other January 19th as well. Anybody have comments on the minutes before we accept or reject them? All right, do I have a motion? Commissioner Senauer,
I so move to accept the minutes of January 19th.
second, please.
Second the motion.
All right. David, you want to take the roll call?
Commissioner Keller,
Yes.
Commissioner Miller.
Yes.
I think that was a yes. Commissioner Kupiec,
Aye.
Yes.
Commissioner Senauer,
Yes.
and Chair Palice.
Yes.
Motion
Thank
passes 5-0.
All right. So shall we move on? And the director's report?
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the commission. I have a brief report this morning. The first thing I want to say is, perhaps you did not know, but David Villalobos was the employee of the month
Hey, hey.
for planning development. We had a board resolution on the 1st of February. And he's just done a tremendous job at being able to keep all of our public hearings going and keeping the operations of the planning commissions, and then helping his staff keep the operations of all the other boards and commissions. It's been quite amazing. And so he's been incredibly dedicated over the last 2 years. So thank you very much, David.
Bravo, bravo. Well deserved.
It's very well deserved. Just to circle back on COVID-19, we will be back to update you on the new health officers' orders. They haven't been published yet. So we appreciate you continuing the remote test hearing, making those findings. But we will, as soon as we can, we will bring everybody back into regular public attendance meetings. And as Mr. Wilson said, we'll follow up with you on what we learn. We are still keeping our calendars open to appointments. They have been for quite some time, and we're continuing in that vein. Seems that people are more interested in submitting their information electronically than coming into the office. So we haven't had our appointments filling up and requests for expansion of those options. But as we see things starting to shift, we'll make a greater number of appointments available. But I think that's been a helpful tool to be able to schedule your appointment online and then come in where people need to submit a check or something like that. So we'll keep you posted on that as well. This is just informational piece. I don't think it has much impact in Montecito, but the ag commissioner came forward with a hemp ordinance because hemp is a crop similar to any other crop in the county, strawberries, broccoli, etc. And the state and the feds had legalized it. So we worked with the Ag Commissioner's Office to figure out the way in which the county would want to regulate it if they wanted to. And the board ultimately decided that they wanted to limit the amount of hemp that's being grown in the county. I think there's about 174 acres currently being grown. And so through the Ag Commissioner's ordinance, they decided to require a license for any grown hemp. And then they also have a cap of a total of 180 acres for hemp being grown in the county.
I have a question, Director.
Sure.
Those situation of growing hemp, I know that Ventura and other counties, there's not this restriction, this low acreage. And I'm surprised that we would enter into that kind of policy where we would just all of a sudden cap it over a quarter of a section over the whole county. Is there some reason that push you there, or push the board there, that would make them do such a kind of a draconian kind of decision making? Seems a bit short, so to speak.
Yes, Mr. Chair. I think the main concern is the conflicts that it creates with cannabis, because it can, they can cross hybridize. I mean, they can become hybrids, right? So if the seeds from the hemp travel to cannabis across the county, then it can impact the cannabis crop. It also is a crop that has all the same impacts that cannabis does, the negative impacts that the community has complained about. And so the board felt as if hemp wasn't really a crop that provided as much benefit to the county in terms of tax dollars. And so they wanted to minimize the conflicts that happened and the potential impacts that could be created by it.
I understand that you are handsomely rewarded by the marijuana growers who are able to be taxed. But for someone like myself, who owns a ranch in Goleta, having the ability to reverse osmosis water and provide ways of using that brine, hemp was one of the very few products that allows something to grow with that kind of disposable water, since we can't dispose of it in the ocean, at least from the distance that we are. But
Mhm.
I'm just surprised, but it's more of a personal issue, so I will drop it. Thank you. This
I
might
recommend you talk to the ag commissioner
really.
because the acreages fluctuate a lot in the county. People come in and out of it. So I
I was
definitely
just surprised by
recommend
the decision, but I
Yeah.
honor it. It's like everybody else. Thank you.
You're welcome. And then in terms of future board items, most of them are county planning commission related, but I will share what the item with you. On March 1st, we have the Galileo Apartments, which are out off Patterson in the 2nd District. And then we have the G&K Cannabis Processing Appeal, which is also on March 1st, and that's in Carpinteria. We have the Orcutt Gas Station and Exxon Trucking on the 8th of March, the Long Range Work Program on the 15th of March. The Steiner appeal of a parcel map in Los Alamos is also on the 15th of March. And then finally, we have a Montecito item, Hawker Philippides lot line adjustment is on the 15th of March. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. I see Commissioner Senhauer has a question.
Hi,
Sorry.
Director Plowman, maybe I missed this. Do we have a new planning commissioner, the county planning commissioner?
Yes, thank you for reminding me. We do have a new county planning commissioner for the 5th district. Commissioner Blau, during the redistricting, unfortunately was excluded from the 5th district. His home was. So he is resigning, and we have a new planning commissioner. His name is, and I'm gonna I think it's Vincent Martinez. Yes, Vincent Martinez, and he's an attorney in the Santa Maria area. And Supervisor Lavanino yesterday appointed him to the County Planning Commission to represent that 5th district. Thanks for reminding me of that.
So we have a lot of new boundaries I noticed and the changes. And so that things like the university is no longer in District 3, it's in 2,
Yeah.
different things like that.
Right. I think the biggest changes are to District 2 and District 3
Right.
and District 4. So, for instance, Los Alamos is now in District 4. And then Guadalupe is now in District 5. So there's been a lot of shifts. If you have questions that, I recommend maps, and then you can reach out to me and I can try and answer anything, any of the questions that you come up with.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions for the director? I see none. Thank you. for
All
your
right.
report.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Have a good day.
Thank you. All right, moving on. David, do you want to, are we going to waive public hearing here and move on here with these
So we have,
non-item?
we have 2 waived hearings. There's nothing for the commission to do here. They
Okay.
just serve as supplemental noticing. So these items were noticed in the paper and to neighbors of the projects. And this is just supplemental to that for anyone who wants to request a hearing. They have until the 23rd to do so, but there's no action for the commission to do here.
Okay. Commissioner Keller, do you have a comment?
I would just appreciate a clarification of the parameters for something being a waived public hearing rather than a full public hearing, since these are both for coastal development permits. Is it because the amount of construction or change is considered de minimis, or is it because there has been no previous objection to it? If you would just clarify that, that would be great.
I'm going to defer to
you, David.
one of our managers here.
So, Mr. Chair, I can respond if you'd like.
Okay, please.
Commissioner Keller to the chair. As Mr. Villalobos indicated, the ordinance does provide an opportunity or options on projects that meet certain criteria as outlined in the ordinance to be able to waive a public hearing requirement. And that's what these applicants have done. Staff reviewed it and found that it met the criteria for a waived public hearing. So these notices are just required by ordinance to notify the public that there's been a request for a waived public hearing.
I understand that. So I just wondered if there was any possibility of summarizing those, what's in the ordinance that makes it eligible for a waived public hearing.
So, Mr. Wilson, I'm just looking at this here. It looks like the size of these particular parcels are very small. Is that the basic criteria, or there's something deeper that we're trying to get to here that we haven't got to? Jeff, Mr. Wilson?
Yeah, Chair, Mr. Chair and Commissioner Keller, I can bring up the ordinance section in a minute that goes over those waived public hearing requirements if you'd like, or we could send that to the commission.
Why don't we just send that to the commission so we can save your voice and we can read it? Is that good enough, Ms. Keller?
It's just for public information because I thought it's important to clarify these things.
Yeah.
Everyone understands why these distinctions occur. That was all. If not too much trouble to bring up the ordinance, that would be great.
So, Mr. Wilson, I don't know whether it's just a real obvious answer how these two qualify, but if it was obvious, I'd love to know what they were. But maybe you could ask one of your planners who are on these two projects if they can tell us at some point before we go home, or send it to us.
So, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Keller, so we're not agendized to go into specifics of these projects. I can outline the requirements for a waived public hearing, but these aren't agendized for an action or a briefing. They're noticing purposes only. So I can go over the requirements for a waived hearing and we can send that to the commission, but these aren't agendized for an action or a briefing on them.
We understand that. Yeah, but like she was saying, Commissioner Keller, maybe the public might want to know why this is happening, just as a review. So unfortunately, I can't tell you why either, but if
Chair
it pops
Pavliche?
up in your mind, yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt. My name's Dan Clement. I'm the Deputy Director of Long Range Planning. I found this section. If Mr. Wilson would like me to just go ahead and read it, I could do so. It's painful to hear him talk right now.
I know.
I'm offended by that comment, but Mr. Keller, Mr. Clem, to preserve everybody's hearing, can you please read that section?
Okay, so for everybody's reference, I'm looking at the Article 2 Coastal Zoning Ordinance, Section 35-169. Dot D, as in Delta, waiver of public hearing. And it says, in so many words, a hearing may be waived if the project qualifies as, quote, minor development, unquote, which for the purposes of the section means a development which the director determines satisfies all of the following requirements. A, the development is consistent with the county's local coastal program of the County of Santa Barbara, and I deleted the reference to the Public Resources Code. B, the development does not require any discretionary approval
So just
other than
just 1 second. I got this other recording that's popped in. So I gotta silence it or mute it.
Sorry about that. So just to repeat, subsection 1B, that was the development does not require any discretionary approvals other than a coastal development permit. And then C, the development would have no adverse effect either individually or cumulatively on coastal resources or public access to the shoreline or along the coast. So there's 3 criteria. It's got to be, once again, it's got to qualify, it's got to be consistent with the county's local coastal program. The project cannot require any other discretionary approvals other than the coastal development permit. And you got to find that the project won't have any adverse effect on coastal resources or public access.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So I guess it comes down to our director's ability to examine those conditions and then her blessing. So I think we're in good order here for now, and we can move on, if you don't mind, to their standard agenda.
Sure. Let me read the first item into the record. The following is a hearing on the request of the Planning and Development Department, Long Range Planning Division, that the Montecito Planning Commission received and filed the 2021 Comprehensive Plan Annual Progress Report. And staff recommends that the Montecito Planning Commission follow the procedures outlined in order to provide by April 1st, 2022, the 2021 Comprehensive Plan Annual Progress Report to the Board of Supervisors, Governor's Office of Planning and Research, California Department of Housing and Community Development, and the City of Santa Barbara.
Okay.
Yes, good morning again, Chair Police. My name is Dan Clement, Deputy Director of Long Range Planning. I have with me a great team of Supervising Planner David Lackey, Karina Venegas, and Brianna Alamia, who will be presenting this item. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Ms. Venegas.
Thank you, Dan. Good morning, Chair Police and Commissioners. This morning, I will be presenting the 2021 Comprehensive Plan Annual Progress Report.
Okay, thank you.
And just to be sure, is the PowerPoint visible?
Not yet.
Okay, I'll hold off until then. Thank you. So the Annual Progress Report, also referred to as the APR, is a state mandated report that provides information regarding the status of the county's comprehensive plan and progress in its implementation, as well as the county's progress in meeting its regional housing needs, RHNA, in calendar year 2021. Government Code Section 65400 requires the county to submit the APR to the Board of Supervisors, Governor's Office of Planning and Research, and State Department of Housing and Community Development by April 1st. The county also submits the report to the City of Santa Barbara in accordance with policies in the Mission Canyon Community Plan. Next slide, please. The 2021 APR shows that the county continues to make progress in maintaining and implementing the comprehensive plan, especially the 2015-2023 Housing Element Update. The Housing Element contains 37 programs to help meet the housing goals and needs of the unincorporated county. The county made progress towards implementing 3 of these programs in 2021, which are listed on this slide. Table D of Attachment 1 to the APR provides information on the status of these and other active programs. And the county also initiated updates to the circulation element and the safety element in 2021, as well as began preparation of an entirely new environmental justice element. Next slide, please. This slide provides a list of projects that the county worked on in 2021, which affect portions of Montecito. The projects noted with CZO only affected the coastal zone portion of Montecito. Next slide. The APR also summarizes the county's progress in meeting its RHNA for the 2015-2023 housing element period. RHNA progress is determined by the number of building permits that the county issued for net new housing units for calendar year 2021. This includes permits issued for housing units such as single-family dwellings, multifamily dwellings, accessory dwelling units, and agricultural employee dwellings. But it does not include replacement units such as disaster rebuilds or group quarters such as dorms. The APR reports the estimated affordability level of each housing unit based on the 2021 state income limits, which are adjusted for household size and based off of available local housing data. Local housing costs are researched and estimated by zip code, and therefore the affordability level of most units depends on their location. In some areas of the county, even small units are not affordable to lower income households and therefore the county cannot automatically assume that all accessory dwelling units and agricultural employee dwellings are affordable by design. Next slide, please. This table shows the number of building permits that the county issued for new housing units organized by income category within the unincorporated county from calendar years 2014 to 2021. The last row of the table shows the county's RENA for each income category for the planning period. In 2021, the county issued building permits for 390 new housing units, which is an increase from the 205 units permitted in 2020. As you can see, the county has exceeded its RENA for the low, moderate, and above moderate income categories. In that same time, the county has only met 43% of its very low income RENA. As shown in the second to last row, the county has issued permits for 68 very low and 198 low income units in total. But most of these units came from accessory dwelling units and large affordable housing projects in 2015 and in 2021. If the county continues this trend of permitting few very low income units, it will continue to fall further behind on meeting its RENA and remain subject to SB 35, which I will discuss in a later slide. Next slide. This graph shows the same information as the previous slide. The number of building permits that the county issued for new housing units from 2014 to 2020, organized by income category. The last set of columns on the right shows the county's total RENA for the planning period, which is 661 units. At 1,791 units, the county has far exceeded its above moderate, moderate, and low RENA. However, the county has all of the Montecito units were affordable to above moderate income households. Next slide. The general location of the new housing units are shown as red and yellow dots on this map. And as you can see, the units were distributed throughout the community plan area. Next slide. Senate Bill 35, codified at Government Code Section 65913.4, establishes a mandatory streamlined ministerial approval process for qualifying housing developments in jurisdictions that have not met their pro rata share of RENA or have not submitted APRs. In June 2018, HCD determined that the county was subject to SB 35 streamlining due to insufficient progress towards meeting its lower income RENA. HCD will release SB 35 determinations annually in June, which will take into account permit data from the previous year's APR. Next slide. SB 35 streamlining applies to qualifying housing developments that contain at least 50% affordable units and are located on urban infill sites. These projects are subject to ministerial objective planning standards. To plan for potential development, long-range planning will continue processing objective design standards for SB 35 projects in 2022. Next slide. The preparation of the APR is an administrative activity that does not authorize new development or otherwise result in physical changes to the environment. Therefore, the preparation and submittal of this report is not a project and is not subject to CEQA. Next slide. To conclude, staff recommends that your commission take the following actions. Receive and file the 2021 Comprehensive Plan Annual Progress Report. Determine that the preparation and submittal of this report is an activity that is not subject to CEQA. And lastly, recommend that the County Planning Commission direct staff to provide the annual progress report to the Board of Supervisors, Governor's Office of Planning and Research, State HCD, and the City of Santa Barbara. Next slide. This concludes staff's presentation, and staff is available to answer any questions. Thank you.
Any, yes, we'll start with our first vice president, our first vice chair, Susan Keller.
Thank you for your report. Would you mind defining urban infill sites? What is that, please? Ms. Venegas?
Commissioner Keller, through the chair, I'm actually going to pull up a definition, unless, specifically from state HCD, unless someone would like to jump in for me. Just one. Commissioner Keller, so an infill housing unit through HCD is defined as being a unit located within an urbanized area or within an urban cluster on site that has been previously developed for urban uses, or a vacant site where the properties adjoining at least two sides of the project site are or previously have been developed for urban uses.
I see. It's just, I'm wondering, we always characterize Montecito as being semi-resident, semi-urban. But we would qualify, Montecito would qualify as having an urban infill potential. Is that correct?
My understanding, yes.
Thank you. And in regard to this SB 35 with the streamlined ministerial permit process, the fact is, although they want to make it easier to get permits to build affordable units, there's nothing that can be done about costs of construction or costs of land, such that anything in Montecito could be anything less than above the moderate income level. Am I right in saying there's no way they can force affordable units when there is no such possibility in a community?
From my understanding of SB 35, there could be some restrictions such as deed restricted units that follow the state's income limits for the low and then very low categories. That is one way that I've seen in the San Diego area.
Would you explain that a little bit better? Deed restricting units? I mean, they would change they would force a kind of rent control on existing units. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes, so the deed restriction can be set for a certain amount of years. So for example, it can be set for 55 years where the rental unit or the for sale unit, specifically more a rental unit, would have to be rented at the low income category, and that low income category would be set by the state in order to qualify under SB 35.
So how could that be applied? I mean, would people need to, I'm just wondering how that might affect existing property owners or existing rental unit owners. How might that be applied toward them?
I think as far as an SB 35 project, if it were processed under SB 35, it would have to meet that criteria. And that would be specific only to those projects that are being processed under that Senate bill.
Those would be all new projects, nothing
Correct.
but projects. Thank you. That was my confusion. All right. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I have a question. Is any, let me look at the rest of the board. Is your hand up? No. I understand that the county can purchase property, like an old motel of sorts. I think there's some plans out in the District 3, I believe. Which case they would put money towards purchasing low-income housing. I was just wondering if one way of getting around the rule, not that we would suggest it, but if the county would put money towards the reduction in the value of some piece of property in Montecito, like land, so a developer could build something that would fit that category, is one option. But I think it could be spent better by having the county purchase properties that are like hotels that are already built that could perform the same function by having low income housing that way. But I just thinking there must be some other way for us to participate. But I know it's not getting any easier with the values of properties, land and or homes in Montecito. But that's sort of an editorial, but I'll stop there. Thank you for that report. Are you complete?
Yes, we are.
Did a nice job. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, shall we move on, David?
So I believe that we have a public speaker for the next item, but I want to give Ms. Byrne the opportunity to speak if she wants. If you'd like to speak on this item, Ms. Byrne, just raise your hand and I'll call on you.
Chair Police, I have a question before Ms. Venegas leaves, please.
Yes,
I've
please.
had my
didn't-
hand up. Ms. Venegas, if you're still there. Yes. Do you have any metrics on building permits in the pipeline? I know these are issued building permits. Do you have any, oftentimes it takes a while, but they've been submitted. Do you have any metrics on that by any chance, countywide and Montecito-wide?
Commissioner Stenhour, through the chair, are you looking for projects that are under SB 35, the ones that are going to be streamlined? Are you looking for projects?
The RENA data you gave listed building permits that had been issued. I'm looking at that quantifier. Do we have any metrics on those that may be in the pipeline but not issued?
Commissioner Stenhour, through the chair, we do. So we actually look at, as well as the 2021 planning permits that come in, and we kind of track them along as they move through the process of being approved and then also receiving an issued building permit. I don't have that information in front of me readily available, but I can present that to you in an email to the commissioners.
Hey, that'd be great. Thank you.
Will do.
Anybody else have a comment or a question? No, I don't think so. All right, well, I'll say goodbye again.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. I think there was a recommendation on actions of receive and file. So if the MPC, or I'm sorry, the Montecito Planning Commission would like to follow staff's recommendation just to receive and file, it's on the first page of the staff report.
Okay. Are we going
Potential
to
motion would be, potential motion could be to move staff's recommendation found on page 1 of the staff report.
Okay, so page 1 on the staff report, we have a recommendation to file and approve. So Mr. Villalobos, you want to put that forth? Or we have a motion, sorry. Susan.
Thank you. I move that we receive and file this staff report on the 2021 Comprehensive Plan Annual Progress Report.
Thank you. A second, please.
I second.
All right.
Commissioner Keller. Commissioner,
Aye.
Commissioner Miller.
Aye.
Thank you. Commissioner Kupiec.
Aye.
Commissioner Stenhour.
Aye.
Chair Police.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
Okay, thank you.
Shall I read the next item into the record, Mr. Chair?
All right, please do, David.
Great. The following is a hearing on the request of the Planning and Development Department Long Range Planning Division staff to have the Montecito Planning Commission receive and file a report regarding the Long Range Planning Division's fiscal year 2022 to 2025 work program, and direct staff to forward any comments that the Montecito Planning Commission might have regarding the work program to the Board of Supervisors.
All right, good morning, Chair Police, members of the commission. Once again, my name is Dan Clemon, and I will be presenting to you the 2022-2025 work program. And then Ms. Jessie Steele from my team will be making a presentation on housing-related matters as well. So just a brief overview of what we're going to be discussing today. First, I'm going to brag about my team's accomplishments, one of my favorite times of year. Then I'm going to talk about what we have on our plates for the remainder of this fiscal year, which will end on July 1st, 2022. And then we'll be describing some of the considerations that go into the development of the recommended work program, and then, of course, describe the recommendations. And then I'll be turning it over to Ms. Steele for a report on housing-related matters. And then after that, we're more than happy to take any questions, take public comments, and then we have some recommended actions for you. And of course, you can interrupt me in asking questions as I go along. This is a very lengthy presentation. So, my favorite part of the year. I want to state that the Long Range Planning Division consists of, we're funded for 14 FTEs, full-time equivalents. That includes myself. We have one vacancy, so I have 12 teammates responsible for cranking out this work that the board asks us to do every year. I want to dedicate this presentation to my great staff. As you'll see, they have done an immense amount of work in less than ideal conditions, and they're to be commended for their service to the county. So with that said, we've done a lot, just going in alphabetical order. With regard to our accessory dwelling units ordinance amendments, we have submitted the local coastal program amendment to the California Coastal Commission for certification. We are working with them on some items to complete that application. Unfortunately, what the Coastal Commission is requesting at this point in time has not been funded by the Board of Supervisors. So we're going to have to ask the board for direction on how they would like us to proceed on that one. But we did get it as far as we could during the first 2 quarters of this year. With regard to our Ag Enterprise Ordinance amendments, we completed a public outreach, and we are now embarking on the environmental impact report. We are going to be publishing a second notice of preparation here very soon, probably within the next 2 weeks. And that will set forth a project description on which we'll be receiving comments, and then we'll be initiating the preparation of the environmental review. With regard to the airport land use compatibility plans amendments, the airport land use compatibility plans, these are plans that SB CAG is responsible for adopting, and they set forth basically the different types of safety zones, noise restrictions, and those sorts of limitations on development around airports. There's one adopted for each one of the airports in the county, and as soon as those are adopted by SB CAG, there's a state requirement that comes into play, and we, the county, must amend our comprehensive plan to be consistent with those plans, and we have 180 days to do that. We were alerted that by SB CAG that they're restarting this project, which has been kind of kicking around for a number of years. Therefore, we are going to be working with them going forward, and we have started that work with them already this year. With regard to our Coastal Resiliency Local Coastal Program Amendment, or LCPA, we are in negotiations with the Coastal Commission staff. The planning director is taking the lead on those negotiations, and we're supporting her in those endeavors.
Excuse me, may I ask a question? You said we could interrupt you.
Please do.
Thank you. With the airport land use compatibility, how many airports are there in Santa Barbara County? And does this include helicopter landing spots or not?
Yes, Commissioner Keller, through the chair. It does, taking the second question first, it does not include, for example, private heliports and things like that. It encompasses the Santa Barbara Airport, Santa Maria Airport, San Ynez Airport, currently the Cuyama Airport. However, there is a possibility that that will not be subject to a plan according to the most recent information we received from SB CAG staff.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. So with regard to the environmental justice element, this is an entirely new state-mandated general plan element that we're working on. We've conducted extensive background research. We conducted an activity that mapped out the disadvantaged communities throughout the unincorporated areas of the county, and now we have embarked on public outreach. And I should say they're very heightened, I'd say, outreach requirements. We're specifically required to target disadvantaged communities, get out in the community, and get their feedback on this topic. So we've begun that. With regard to our farm stays ordinance amendments, we are wrapping up the mitigated negative declaration for that project. It should be published in March. And of course, we completed public outreach earlier this year. You're going to be hearing a heck of a lot more about the housing element update, but we have complete background research, selected consultants to help us out with a number of tasks that we must complete, and initiate the public outreach with regard to that project. The third to last bullet on this slide, the Local Agency Formation Commission report backs. When we receive notification that Local Agency Formation Commission, or LAFCO, is going to take action on a particular project, they contact us, and then we, the Planning and Development Department, take the lead on behalf of the county to organize the county's collective response to LAFCO. So we consolidate all the comments that are received by the various departments that have purview over these. And then we put together a response on behalf of the county executive office. And we received 5 of those during the first 2 quarters, and we completed those. We also assumed the management responsibilities of the Planning and Development Department's pre-approved consultants list. This is a list that applicants may use when they are selecting consultants to prepare special studies for applications. So we're taking the lead on that. And I also am very pleased to say that Ms. Venegas, who presented the last item to you this morning, was promoted to Planner 3, much deserved promotion. That created a vacancy that we're now trying to fill, and we're assisting our HR department on that.
I have a question, if you might stop for a second.
Sure.
Back to the consultancy approval process. Is that something that's spelled out, how you qualify to be a consultant for projects for private sector? Or
Yes, Chair Police. So there are minimum qualifications you must demonstrate. So you would have to submit, for example, a resume and probably a cover letter just explaining how you meet those minimum qualifications. We'd review that, and then provided that you meet the minimum quals, we put you on there. Yeah, it's a pretty straightforward process. We try to be very accommodating for the obvious reason. We don't want to exclude anyone if they are qualified.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir. And I should explain, you don't necessarily need to be on that list. You just need to have the qualifications to perform the studies. It's just a tool or resource that applicants can use. Okay, you're going to hear more about the RENA, which you heard about in the last presentation. You're going to hear about more at the end of this presentation. We provided a lot of support to, once again, SB-CAG staff with the development of the RENA, and we completed that. Now are in the thick of the housing element update to accommodate the housing demand shown in that RENA. We also, that is, the Planning and Development Department is responsible for responding to notices of projects received from other jurisdictions. We call these responsible agency reviews. The name's kind of misleading because we're not necessarily a responsible agency in the CEQA sense of the term, but whenever we receive notice of a project in another jurisdiction that may have an effect on the unincorporated county or the goals that the board have set forth, we will consider providing commentary on those notices. And the Planning and Development Department takes the lead on behalf of all the county departments in putting together those responses on behalf of the county executive office. Very similar to those LAFCO report backs that I just described. So we received 18 notices of projects during the first 2 quarters, to which we responded to 3. And yeah, those, I should say, they're variable. We have no control over the number of notices that we receive. And as I'll explain later on in this presentation, we do try to accommodate for that level of work that is associated with those tasks.
So may I interrupt once more for a question, please? When you talked about LAFCO, the area I'm most familiar with LAFCO is, for example, when Goleta wanted to be a city, or the exploration of Montecito for cityhood. What other kinds of local agencies would be formed that you had the 5 reports for? And correspondingly, what are the notices of projects? What kinds of projects would you receive notices about? Things that might bleed over into Santa Barbara County, or have, can you tell us what those impacts might be, please?
Sure. Commissioner Keller, through the chair. The other types of projects that we typically see are changes to the boundaries for districts that provide public utilities. So for example, sewer districts, water districts. Sometimes there are exceptional situations where LAFCO will be considering allowing facilities to be extended outside of existing boundaries, and they consider these agreements called extraterritorial service agreements, things like that. And then also when you're talking about annexations, property tax conveyances, things like that come into play. So we have to coordinate with the tax assessor's office and others as well. So.
Thank you. So that's the LAFCO situation, or those are the LAFCO type reports. What about the responsible agency? What kind of things would affect, what kind of projects would affect Santa Barbara County, but not necessarily be in Santa Barbara County?
Sure. Commissioner Keller, through the chair. Let's assume that you have a new project within a city's boundaries that is going to send traffic to county maintained roadways. In that situation, the Public Works Department would want to be informed of that and would want to comment on it to make sure that whoever is the proponent of the project pays their pro rata portion of the impacts to the county roadways. So they would want to review that and comment on it. One example of many, many types of projects that we see.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much.
Sure. Okay, moving right along. Our next really big project in our work program is our safety element update. As you received a report on, I guess it's about a month ago now, we completed the climate change vulnerability assessment. That was the first phase of this two-phase project. And then now we're moving on to the adaptation portion of the project. We received a grant from the California Fire Safe Council for mapping evacuation routes. This is one of the requirements of this update. And we received $375,000 to do that, so we're really pleased about it. With regard to the Santa Claus Lane project, this is the project to enhance access across the railroad from Santa Claus Lane to the beach. And we processed a time extension for the coastal development permit for that project. The project's now in the Public Works and Community Services Department, Parks Division's hands. They're going to be responsible for implementing it. With regard to our state housing and density bonus law implementation projects, we have worked on ordinances to codify 3 state housing and density bonus laws. They're listed here. You'll hear more about those later in the presentation. And then with regard to our utility scale solar ordinance amendments project, we've completed some research for that project and also looked at the scope of work for it. Okay, also during the first 2 quarters, the County Executive Office invited us to participate in an Innovate SBC process improvement project. Innovate SBC is the organization with whom the county has contracted to conduct process improvement projects, not only for the Planning and Development Department, but countywide. The goals of this particular project were to basically come up with efficiencies, process improvements, to more efficiently process these projects with the goal of being able to bring on more capacity. That is, bring on more projects and programs that the board has requested us to initiate, but we haven't been able to do so for a multitude of reasons. We had a number of participants in this project. Once again, the County Executive Office, Ms. Jenna Richardson from County Council helped us out. We also had P&D Executive Management, Mr. Alex Tuttle from Development Review, and Long Range Planning Division staff participated in this. There were a number of recommendations that were identified to the process for getting a project through the work program, but some of the key recommendations, the highlights that is, we identified a new rapid amendments process. Ms. Venegas developed a procedure for processing certain zoning ordinance amendments in a more expedited fashion. These would be ordinance amendments over which the board has very little to no discretion, are CEQA exempt, and are highly popular for one reason or another. We want to just get those through as quickly as possible. So we came up with a process for that. We also want to be more reliant upon our technology for conducting outreach and project management, especially during this COVID time when we've had to conduct all of our outreach virtually. We've developed the skills to use this technology. We see the potential for doing even greater outreach, and we want to rely on those tools even more so going forward. When we're working with our technical advisory committees, this would be committees that are appointed, for example, by the Board of Supervisors, like the Agriculture Advisory Committee, our boards of architectural review. We want to develop procedures, service level agreements, or something equivalent to that, such that we can have a predictable process and get these projects through and get their advice in a timely manner, such that we get their feedback at those times where we can really do something with it. And then another item we identified was just utilizing consultant services more so for especially labor and time intensive tasks. As I mentioned earlier in this presentation, we're seeing greater requirements from the state to conduct more extensive outreach, particularly with regard to disadvantaged communities. Gone are the days where we can go in and have a charrette at a church or a community center, have people go down there, put some stickies on a whiteboard and call it a day. Now we must proactively go out into the communities and have regular engagement from these communities throughout the entirety of the process. And that we can do that as staff, but it's very labor and time intensive, and also in many circumstances requires bilingual skills too. So we want to rely more on consultant services. We see that as being the more efficient and more beneficial way of doing outreach. Related to that, when we're relying on consultant services, the Planning Development Department has on-call consultants that we can use. And if we can rely upon them rather than doing one-off contracts with consultants for our individual projects, with their efficiencies with that. So we want to do more of that going forward. And then finally, this is more business administrivia for us internally, but we want to create more templates, project management tools that will better enhance our project managers' abilities to keep these projects on time, on budget, and just better track them overall.
I have a question about that section that you just went over. I'm curious, how are we staffed in terms of long-range planning division in comparison to, say, San Luis Obispo County and Ventura County? One being population larger than us, one being population smaller than us. Are we understaffed relative to kind of our boxing weight?
Commissioner Miller, through the chair, that's a good question. There was a comparative study done a few years ago, and we were relatively small, actually. However, it gets a bit tricky because I know, for example, in Ventura County, I used to work there, have comrades who are still there, and they've reorganized in some important ways. For example, they created a whole new division or section, I should say, just to conduct their general plan update. And it was a fairly extensive one. It was arguably a holistic update. And that was separate and distinct from their long-range planning division like what we have here. So they're definitely larger if you combine all of those groups. But that's a good question. I should look into that now to compare the status.
That last meeting, the topic came up of county planning needing the resources to potentially have an emergency SB 9 regulation. And Director Plowman spoke rather thoughtfully to the notion of staffing priorities, and there's only, there's not enough butter being spread over too much bread. She didn't use those words, but that's my kind of homespun interpretation of it. And so as this body, we potentially have a vested interest in recommendations to the County Board of Supervisors about staffing levels and appropriate funding to meet our community's planning needs. And so my curiosity is it's your job to play goalie and to kind of, I don't know, big on hockey right now with the Olympics, but that you're supposed to be, keeping all the pucks out of the net, but it seems like there are more and more shots on goal. And so the stress of the challenge of this group has an interest in an emergency SB 9 ordinance versus everything you've laid out. In your mind, what is a staffing level or an expectation that we as a body should be asking for to be meeting what we think are at least this commission's needs in the context of the overall county? Yeah, I understand you can't staff just against Montecito Planning Commission desires, but if you do not have the bandwidth to be doing an SB 9 emergency ordinance, and I'm not doubting that you don't, what would a staffing and funding level look like that would get us there?
Sure, Commissioner Miller, through the chair. In our work program already is a recommendation to conduct implementation of state housing and density bonus laws. As you're going to hear from Ms. Steele later on in this presentation, there's a number of them. Just last year, there was over 30 passed. So it's a question of what's the priority for the board. If the board would like to say prioritize SB9 as part of that project and say, hey, staff, we really want you to work on that one now and get us some good standards, they very well could do so. So if you wanted to make that recommendation, you're very welcome to do so. I do want to get back to just the concept of staffing levels, and it's important in the context of this discussion of this process improvement project, because if you kind of use like a tube, hollow tube as a metaphor, and then through that tube, you got to get all the long-range planning division work through. Well, the tube was getting backed up, right, with kind of inefficient procedures, public outreach, which was taking longer than anticipated. So the purpose of this project was to try to clean out that tube to get the projects through more quickly. So we're hoping we're going to develop some efficiencies such that we can get things through more quickly so we can onboard more projects that the board's requested in the past. That is not expanding the tube in terms of capacity with regard to staffing levels. I don't think one or the other is going to accomplish all of the goals that the board wants us to achieve. It's going to be some combination of the two, which is why the CEO asked us to embark on this first before we go and ask for money in the springtime. Long-winded way of saying is it's a matter of trade-offs. If you want to expand the tube, that's fine, but you got to understand that requires us going to the CEO, and the CEO has to look at all of the priorities of the county and go to the board and say, yeah, we can find money for this or not. But of course, we want to avoid that at all possible. So that's why we're doing these efficiencies. So if you find after these recommendations that you would like to prioritize one item over the other, this is your opportunity to do so, and we would present that to the board for consideration.
I think that, and I don't mean to be too presumptuous about the other members of the commission, but that Montecito as a community has a series of items and goals that we want to achieve. But obviously, the planning department is not the Montecito planning department, it's the countywide planning department. And so I think my question is, when we won't go in and ask for a set of goals, I think it's helpful for us to understand where that falls relative to kind of funding expectations or whatnot. And so I think that I'm not sure if you were on the call last whole lot, but why do we not have an emergency ordinance? And so it was very clear as to why we don't. But aside from asking the Board of Supervisors that we want to approve an emergency ordinance, but to get that achieved, that is a staffing request that we need to be matching to your department. And so I guess I would like to understand what are realistic staffing levels or financial requests that we should be accompanying along with our request of, we want to pass this, we want to talk about emergency plan, SB9 ordinance, but we need the resources to do it. Dear Board of Supervisors, we would expect these resources to be available for our commission's goals.
Yes, so Commissioner Miller, through the chair, you may want to, can we hold that thought? Because later on in this presentation, I'm going to discuss the considerations that go into our recommendations and then some of the assumptions. And what you're going to see is that the assumption that we make at this point in time when we're developing our recommendations is that we will not receive any expansion in staffing resources. That is, we'll have for the next fiscal year the 14 FTE currently allocated. But what you're going to see also is that we are going to provide options in the event that the board finds additional resources and can expand our staffing, either through consultant services or through entirely new staff. And we have options for that. And you do not necessarily need to agree with staff's recommendations on those options. It's really a policy call. And you could say, hey, no, we really think this other item, SB9 or something like that, is more important. And that should be the priority. It's well within your right to do so. So if you want to just hold tight, and if we don't answer your questions by the end of this presentation, I'd be more than happy to revisit it and do so.
I have a question I'd like to jump in here with if I could. You mentioned this $375,000 grant. Does that money, how is that distributed? Does that go to across the county activities that you foresee? Or how does that work? How do you plan on spending that money?
Yes, Chair Police. So that particular grant, to back up, that was the grant in the amount of $375,000, which we are using for our safety element update. The grantor is the California Fire Safe Council. And the purpose of that grant is to conduct a mapping exercise that identifies evacuation routes throughout the county, and then ultimately where we have deficiencies to come up with adaptation, how to change them to make it happen. So those monies are now, that particular grant is used on staff time. It will also be used for consultant services in developing those maps. This particular grant, there are other agencies that will benefit from it. That is particularly our Office of Emergency Management. So they will also receive, a certain amount of money for their time spent on reviewing this and their staff time and reviewing the maps to make sure it meets their.
So is any of this money going towards the Montecito Fire Department's report on evacuation that's coming up? You guys spend any money with them?
I do not believe that, no, none of these monies will be spent particularly for that effort. What we would do, I'd imagine, though, is when it gets to the point of preparing maps for the Montecito area, we would definitely want to take a look at their efforts because we don't want to duplicate the work.
And then one more thing, sort of about what Commissioner Miller was referring to. There's on the Coastal Resiliency Project. It says here in the paragraph that the planning director and representatives of the board are currently negotiating potential compromises for the areas of disagreements. One of the comments was that there's not enough staff to provide the information that we need. Is that also part of the inadequacies that we have a shortness of our staff, or is just that they have a disagreement about policy?
Good question, Chair Police. This is actually a question about policy, and what I don't want to go too down in the weeds on the status of the Coastal Resiliency LCPA, but in general, what happened was after working for literally years with Coastal Commission staff, we found that we, at a staff level, could not convince the Coastal Commission staff to change some of their modifications such that we felt comfortable saying that it was within the range of reasonability of what the board adopted, that we could go back and we could support it. And ultimately, the Director Plowman got enough information from the board to know that they concurred with our position. So right now, it's in limbo. Yeah, it's the planning director and certain members of the board are meeting with the executive director of the Coastal Commission to discuss the areas of disagreement and try to come to some resolution. I really don't know.
I just want to ask you, was there a vote by the Coastal Commission that was denied this cooperation, or is this something done by just the team, the executive team of the Coastal Commission? Why do we have this issue? Can you give me a short answer why we have this problem?
Sure. So it's a procedural issue. So the board approved an LCPA that we submitted to the Coastal Commission for certification. With all the extensions and whatnot, basically, Coastal Commission was running out of time to take action on the LCPA, and it got to the point where we could either two options were available. Either they said we either needed to withdraw the application, or they were going to take the application with their suggested modifications to the Coastal Commission for a vote on whether or not to certify that modified LCPA. And when we found that we could not accept or agree upon those modifications, we reluctantly had to withdraw the application. So the Coastal Commission never took formal action on it. It's all at the staff level at this point.
Okay, so is there any immediate effect by the non-action?
Actually, no. It's more status quo. And what's interesting about this, too, is that because applicants in the coastal zone, particularly those who have to deal with sea level rise and plan for it for projects, I mean, they're savvy. They're looking down the road and they say, hey, I know that the Coastal Commission staff is going to have an opportunity to appeal whatever the county approves. So I might as well just play ball and design this according to the Coastal Commission staff standards to avoid the opportunity for appeal. So what happens is people submit the application to our development review staff. Our development review staff are working with Coastal Commission staff to say, hey, will this pass your muster, or what would you like? They're proposing this, and they try to coordinate to try to get something that will work. So it's kind of interesting. A lot of what the Coastal Commission staff would like is already kind of de facto being implemented on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, well, good enough. So, Mr. Miller, do you have another comment?
Mr. Chair, I have a lot of comments, but I'm sensitive to the notion that maybe this isn't the right moment for all of this. I would say, I guess my final comment is more to the rest of the commission is that there seems we struggle with a little bit of a disconnect from the things that we wish to do and the inability to kind of advance the staff agenda of their time and focus as a funding question. And I would be interested in kind of how other commission members would want to see this addressed, and kind of what is the right way to push forward on not at the commission level, but at the staff level of kind of a Montecito focus on certain topics. And to your point on coastal area stuff, on SB 9 things, there's a variety of topics that we could kind of go through the list on, and they may not be important on a county-wide basis, but they're important to us. And so how do we kind of advance an important to us agenda?
Yeah. Well, not all the county is bordered by an ocean. You're right. So I don't know. It's a hard question to answer, and I won't try. So we'll see what else we have to hear from. So shall we proceed?
Yeah.
Sounds good. So if we get the presentation back up on the screen. Great, thank you. So with regard to remaining tasks for this fiscal year, the Public Works Department is working on an active transportation plan. This will form the basis of amendments that we will then make to our circulation element with regard to coming up with multimodal forms of transportation. And then also what we'll be working on later on, as you'll see in a little bit, is more extensive updates to our circulation element. So we'll be assisting the Public Works with the development of the ATP this year. As I mentioned earlier, for our Ag Enterprise Ordinance amendments, we're going to be working on the EIR as well as prepare a draft ordinance for the decision makers' consideration. I already mentioned the airport land use compatibility plans. Once those plans are adopted, we're going to get moving on getting those amendments in process. And so for the remainder of this year, we're going to be working with SBCAG staff to make sure that we're coordinating and we can be equipped such that when that timeline comes into play, we can meet the deadline to finish the project. With regard to annual progress report, about what you just heard, we got to file that by April 1st with HCD. And then with regard to our capital improvements program, comprehensive plan consistency report, this is a mandated report whereby we do a review of the Public Works Department, actually it's the General Services Agency's capital improvements program, and for consistency with comprehensive plan, we're going to be going to the County Plan Commission next week for that. And then for the Climate Action Plan, we have the Community Services Department is working on an extensive update to what was formerly called the Energy and Climate Action Plan. There was a monitoring period associated with the Energy and Climate Action Plan, or ECAP, during which the Community Services Department was required to provide updates on our GHG emissions and how we're doing with regard to meeting the targets for reduction. There's going to be a final plan report that they're going to present to the board. We're going to assist them with that, and then also assist them with the much larger Climate Action Plan, which is the update and will replace the current Energy and Climate Action Plan. So Finally, with the environmental justice elements, we will be in the thick of public outreach, and we'll be starting up on the mitigated negative declaration for that project. For farm stays, as I mentioned earlier, the MND will be out for public review most likely next month, and then following that, we will prepare the project for hearings. For the housing element update, you're going to hear more about this later. We are going to be conducting data analysis, extensive public outreach, and initiating our EIR for that project. You might have saw at the board yesterday, the Community Services Department provided an update on the Recreation Master Plan, and associated with that plan are amendments to our comprehensive plan that we're going to anticipate preparing after the Recreation Master Plan is adopted by the board. So right now what we're doing is we're coordinating with the Community Services Department on that plan with regard to matters that will affect the work that we will have to do. With regard to the safety element update, we are in the thick of public outreach, and we are going to be initiating the Adaptation Plan, which is the second phase of this project. And you're going to be hearing more about state housing and density bonus law later on, but effectively we have 3 ordinances that are pretty much good to go. We could take those decision maker hearings, but we want to hear back from the board about whether or not they want us to complete that or maybe start something else given the recently adopted laws. And then with regard to our zoning ordinance amendments and the zoning ordinance itself, Ms. Venegas will be working on a package of ordinance amendments that the board requested. We will be presenting those to decision makers starting late summer into the fall. And then also Ms. Venegas is working with the clerk of the board to have our zoning ordinances published with the county code that is published online and managed by MuniCode. So we're excited on that. Okay, so this is going to get to, I believe, Commissioner Miller's question regarding some of the items that go into the considerations when we're developing the work program, because these are some of the things you want to consider when making your recommendations. If it sounds like you're kind of trying to get a handle on what's realistic or reasonable to be requesting as a representative of Montecito versus the entirety of county, well, these are the things that we consider as staff when we're making our recommendations. So first off, many of these projects are multi-year projects, so we gotta make sure that we have the support for them year to year in order to make sure that they're successful and we can actually complete them. Second, we're always looking at what is coming down the pike with regard to state laws, court decisions that will affect the work that we do, orders from entities like the Federal Communications Commission, and try to keep our comprehensive plan up to date to the degree possible with all of these changes that affect what we do. The comprehensive plan includes a number of programs that we are tasked with implementing in order to effectuate the goals that are set forth in the comprehensive plan. So we always try to get as many of those into our work program as possible. And then we want to make sure that the county-sponsored projects, that is, the projects that we're working with the other departments on, are properly supported, and we get them what they need such that they can be successful, and then we consequently can be successful in the work that we have to do, which is related to these plans. And then, as always, it's always comes down to the dollar, right? And this is a business. We got to balance the political interests with the business administrative interests, and those are not always one and the same. So it's important to keep in mind the practical business limitations on what we can and can't do in any given fiscal year. As I mentioned earlier.
Can I interrupt you for a second here?
Yes, sir.
Speaking of paying for costs of projects, on this Santa Claus Lane beach access, you talk about putting a roundabout in. Is that something that's going to be paid for by Caltrans, the county? Who pays for that?
Very good question. Chair Police, Caltrans does. As one of the mitigation measures for the 101 widening project, they were put on the hook to fund the Santa Claus Lane project, which includes that roundabout that's going to be installed for that particular project.
I see. So like that, but that's not in their right of way. That's still, but a part of their freeway project?
Correct. It's actually a mitigation measure from their project. So for impacts to public access, wetlands, others, they were required to offset, so to speak, those impacts by paying to support this county project. And that's how it's going. That's how it's been going.
So then, to further extend this kind of debate, so the sound walls are not necessarily all on the Caltrans right away, but it's still part of their mitigation needs or requests to pay for. That's not part of the county, right? Is that not true?
Chair Police, I'm going to channel my inter-county council at this point, and I would say that we should probably not talk about the sand walls as a part of this particular item because we're not noticed to do so.
Good point. I just want to make sure that we know that the Caltrans that's part of their responsibility, but we'll move on. Thank you.
Sure thing. So with regard to the P&D budget, I mentioned earlier we have 14 FTEs. We have 1 vacancy right now that we're trying to fill. Our funding sources come primarily from the general fund, but there are other sources. Grant funds are becoming much more important for us. I didn't mention earlier that we are also submitting an application right now for another $150,000 on top of the $375,000 that we already received for the safety element update to do some work on the adaptation side of things. So hopefully we'll get that as well. But there's also a small fee that's attached to every building permit that's issued, which goes to the maintenance of the general plan, and then finally cannabis tax revenue. And when it comes to grant-funded projects, it's free money, so to speak. So we always want to keep those on track. So those are prioritized.
Commissioner Sinauer, did you want to ask a question?
Yes, thanks. If I could, what is the PD budget in dollars?
Overall budget, that would be a very good question for somebody not me right now. I could get that for
Mr.
you.
Chair?
The planning director might have that. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Yes.
Oh, hi.
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Sinauer. Yeah, our budget is about 27 million.
Okay. Thank you. And while I'm still on budget and revenue, cannabis tax revenue has apparently not been as robust as it was last year. And so what is the discrepancy this year? And my second part is, how is that earmarked? Where does cannabis tax revenue, where does it go? Is it earmarked for particular areas, or is it just a general sort of whoever cries loudest gets it? So can you kind of talk about those two things, please?
So, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Sinauer, I actually don't have the specifics on the changes in the revenue. I know that it was presented to the board. And I think there's been a glut in the market and the prices come down. So we've seen less people growing. So I don't have the numbers on that. And I can tell you that the board does allocate the revenues, and they do it during budget workshops. And so there have been a number of programs that have helped with homelessness, I believe. There have been a number of programs that they helped that are recreational oriented or health oriented. And sometimes they give cannabis dollars to support activities for county staff. For instance, we received cannabis dollars to help us cover the cannabis appeals that have to be processed by the department, because the department is responsible for paying for appeals. So there's a variety of uses for that money. I believe some of it went to libraries. So there's really a broad range of uses. And I do not believe that the board has a particular mandate about how they're going to allocate it. But again, that's more of a CEO question.
Okay. And it would the cannabis taxes would go to enforcement also, besides, right?
Yes,
other
that's
things.
correct. That's correct.
So,
Staff has been provided to, cannabis dollars were used to staff additional folks in the sheriff's department to help with enforcement, is my understanding.
So basically, the lobbying for dispersal of tax revenue, cannabis tax revenue would come through the CEO's office, their recommendation?
And it happens through the budget process.
Right,
Yes.
right. Would our commission, could we basically recommend or ask that it be a consideration that tax revenue might go to an SB 9 sort of zoning ordinance so that could be part of how we, at the end of the day-to-day, sort of proceed with a recommendation that, in fact, revenue from a particular source we would recommend, something like that.
I mean, you can certainly make comments to that effect
Right.
that we could pass on to the board, and you're certainly welcome to reach out to Supervisor Williams to talk to him about what the Montecito Planning Commission's interests are.
Right.
And yeah.
And when does this go before it is?
Budget workshops are beginning of April.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks very much.
Director Plowman, or sorry, Mr. Chair. Do you mind
Yes,
if I-
please.
Don, I don't mean to interrupt you, though. Are you?
Nope, go ahead.
I'm curious as to that. I wish to be very clear that our intention in the questioning is not to slice a bigger piece of the existing pie, but more to kind of lobby for more pie overall, with dedicated pie on our for our. I'm curious though as to the permit and development fees that are coming Montecito to the planning department. None of that gets earmarked for long-term planning. That is all in the kind of building and develop the building department kind of stuff.
That's correct.
Is that fair? Okay, but that if in honing our own arguments on this, I focus on Montecito's perhaps outsized permit development fee kind of stuff would be less of a focus and more of the contribution to the general fund from property taxes. Is that in terms of an area of focus for greater long-term planning? Is that,
I would say that yes, the permitting revenues do not go to long-range planning, because long-range planning is its own separate revenue fund at this point. So P&D, all the other operations of P&D went into a special revenue fund, and long-range planning is still a general fund budget. So we are separated. So money from the permitting does not go to long-range planning.
Not go to long-range planning. And so the result is that Montecito's impact is not necessarily felt in the long-term planning budget unless we make it so.
That's correct. That's correct. It would have to be general fund money or something else.
For which Montecito plays an important role there too. Yeah. Okay. No, I appreciate that. No.
Can we go back to the presentation?
Sure
Please.
thing. Just waiting for the slide to come up for you. Okay, so with all of that, our recommendations. So with regard to our services, as I mentioned before, some of these we really don't have very much control over because it's really contingent upon the activities of others. But what we do is I monitor this from year to year, look at trends. We are overall, if you look at, for example, 10 years trends, some of the activities are up, definitely with regard to things like the responsible agency reviews, the LAFCO report backs. Those have consistently been up and seem to be staying so over the number of years. So we are allocating more time for that. And then, as I mentioned earlier too, we took on the assignment of managing the Planning Development Department consultants list. So we've taken on a few more activities, but overall, on average, these activities do add up to about 2 FTEs annually. So that's what we guesstimate, so to speak, for projecting to the next fiscal year. With regard to the business operations, this is pretty standard from year to year. These really don't change. I would say the thing that may be dynamic is something like the Innovate SBC project that we conducted. Also, when it comes to particular specialized trainings that might become available, we may take advantage of those. But overall, it is looking at about 3 FTEs every year, and that's what we're estimating for the next year for these activities. With regard to the mandated and or grant-funded comprehensive plan projects, as I mentioned earlier, we want to keep the funding for these projects going. They have deadlines that must be met, or we're going to suffer consequences as a result of those. So we're allocating the staffing that we believe, or excuse me, we're estimating the staffing that we need to make those deadlines. So as you can see, the housing element update is our biggest work effort. By February of next year, you'll hear more about this. We need to complete the housing element update and submit it to state HCD. So we are dedicating quite a few resources to that for the first half of the year. We have 4 planners right now regularly working on this project, and it's needed. We're barely going to make this project. The timeline for this project is very accelerated, and it's going to take a lot of effort on our part. So we have to put forth the effort to get that done. So when we add up all of the FTEs that we're estimating for next year for these projects, it comes out to a little under 6 FTEs. With regard to the non-mandated ongoing projects, these are projects that the board has asked us to conduct at least at some point in the past. That still requires some effort in order to complete. I already described to you the accessory dwelling units, LCPA. Also, I should say the coastal resiliency LCPA and short-term rentals LCPA. There's all minimal activity projected to occur on that. And if we were to get more resources, we might be able to do more, particularly with regard to the ADUs and the short-term rentals LCPA. But we will need more funding for these projects, particularly with regard to the short-term rentals LCPA. The Coastal Commission staff is expecting us to conduct a parking analysis for that project for which we're not funded. So if the board wants us to proceed with that, they may do so. They're just going to have to either delay other projects or give us more resources to conduct that. So out of these projects, the majority of the work will be spent on the utility scale solar, and the majority of that activity is likely to occur during the second half of the next fiscal year, given that the staff resources for that project are going to be focused on the housing element during the first half of the year. So I'll stop there for any questions.
Yes, thank you. I'm just curious on how do we, or do you make a decision on who gets the FTEs? I mean, for example, you just showed that we have nothing going forward to some of this housing issues. Who decides on who gets what FTEs?
Good question. So Chair Palicha, there's a number of considerations that go into that. So first off, we always look to those state mandates, grant-funded projects, allocate all the time for that just to make sure that we don't compromise those. Then we look at what's left over, and then we look at, okay, where are the projects in the process? What resources are remaining to complete the projects? What direction have we heard from the board and others with regard to the prioritization of those projects? And we take all of that kind of in consideration. We go back to the project managers. They go into a very detailed mapping process of, okay, it'd take these many resources, these tasks to complete this project by this point in time. We look at all that. It inevitably is more work than what we have staff and resources for. And then we have to scale it back. And we kind of use prioritization based upon what we're hearing back from.
Well, let me ask you this
all
question.
those factors. So
let me ask you a question. I see here October 2017, 4.5 years ago, the board approved a zoning ordinance amending STRs and certain commercial zoning, blah, 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 for short-term rentals. So yet I look at it here, it says we're going to delay and have no FTEs to address it. So how do we just let things like this linger? Is that something it's just, there's just no push or demand from the public sector to force the county into making these kinds of studies, or what makes it happen? What's the inertia to make something like this be concluded?
Chair Palicha, politics.
Okay.
I'm a political scientist, so you gotta excuse me. No, in all seriousness, It is whatever the board is receiving the most pressure to prioritize at any given time. So, for example, let's take short-term rentals. That's a great example of, go back 5-6 years ago. You cannot crack open a newspaper, virtual or otherwise, locally, and not see some story about the horrors of short-term rentals and the plague it was causing our society. Now, it's SB 9. So that's what everybody's hearing about. And you see political movement and pressure and influence put on the board to prioritize these items. And that's how it works.
Comments from the other commissioners? Go right ahead.
Yeah, regarding STRs and the CZO, since there hasn't been any progress and it's not funded, regarding the overlay, which I believe was part of the STR and the CZO. So the status quo exists, is that right? In the CZO, in the coastal zone, is that correct?
Commissioner Senauer, through the chair, that's correct. So currently short-term rentals in the coastal zone are unregulated from a zoning perspective.
But inland, it's very different.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Keller? Can't hear you.
Yes, sorry. No, that was obviously my concern, because I wondered what with the delay in the ADUs. So the status quo with ADUs then is what came down a year ago, January. I mean, can you just tell us, with nothing being done, what is status quo with regard to the ADUs as it impacts Montecito?
Okay, Commissioner Keller, through the chair. So with regard to the accessory dwelling units, so the position right now, and I'm pausing because we've heard differences from Coastal Commission with regard to some of these policies, but with regard to ADUs, our existing regulations apply. So for example, the Coastal Act still, all the Coastal Act resources considerations still go into play when it comes to processing the coastal development permit. What's different though now is that we don't have a hearing for these ADUs. So, and what we do is we look at state law, the state government code law, and what it says with regard to ADUs. And we look at obviously the public resources code, that is the Coastal Act, and then we look at and combine those, and then we'll make our decisions accordingly. So we use existing regulations, but it would be beneficial if we had something in the ordinance which provided more guidance on those, and eventually we'll hopefully get there.
Because yes, it does seem as though it's a little unclear. There are no clear-cut regulations. And it appears, this is just my interpretation, that with both the ADUs and with the short-term rentals, that a major part of the hangup is the lack of coordination with the Coastal Commission.
Commissioner
Is that
Keller, Chair, I don't want to portray it so cynically. Or pessimistically, what I'd say is there are differences in policy opinions on how to best implement the Coastal Act. How about that for being diplomatic?
Thank you. Now that's very diplomatic, but what it means is, has it gotten beyond the staff level with either of these issues? Is there any way to move this forward such that we can have some agreement so that there can be some clear definitions of what's possible for both short-term rentals and ADU in the coastal zone? Is there anything that can be done in terms of pressure being brought to move this ahead and to make this bring this to the actual Coastal Commission rather than keeping it at a staff level?
Commissioner Senauer, through the chair, yes, there's always efforts that can be made by different entities. For the Montecito Planning Commission, what you could do is say, as part of your recommendations to the board, say, hey, board, we really believe that this is important. You dedicate resources to elevating these conversations such that there's lobbying at the executive level to get more cooperation on the board-approved LCPAs. That's totally legitimate. One option that the board could do, which I always think is a good one, is the board could, for example, form an ad hoc committee to act on behalf of the board to negotiate with other entities. That's something that the board could consider. These are all
Thank you
just
very-
examples of things. So
Thank you very much for making that recommendation, because these are two items that are of real importance to Montecito. And if we have a chance to have input to the board, it would be great. Thank you for suggesting a way to do that. I appreciate that.
Sure.
Before we go further, I just we have an estimate of how much time we will be spending on your presentation. If it's longer than an hour, I think we should probably take a break.
the remainder of this presentation should not take an hour. I'd guesstimate 15, 20 minutes to get through the remainder of my portion and then through Miss Steele's portion.
Okay,
up to
I think my attention span is good for that. Anybody else want a break? We okay? All right, let's go for it. Thank you.
Great. If we could just have the presentation back up on the screen. Yeah, so just to finish out here, for the non-mandated ongoing projects, we're estimating a little over 3 FTEs for that work. I don't expect everybody to read this schedule timeline of projects for the 3-year work program. This is in the staff report, so you can refer to that just in different colors. The takeaway from this, though, is that next year we are fully allocated. As you can see, in fiscal year 2022, 2023, we have a bunch of work that we need to complete, driven mainly by those state mandated deadlines. As we get into fiscal year 2023, 2024, we are going to have more capacity to take on additional projects. And then we have probably the most potential to do new stuff looking out towards years 2 and 3 of the work program.
Do you have this LEAP grant money already?
Yes, sir.
Okay, all right.
But I like you looking out for us. We're always looking for more grants. If you hear anything, let us know. We're always looking. But in all seriousness, so going forward for future projects, that is after the next fiscal year, the board could resume work on the ADUs and short-term rentals LCPAs. We also have the comprehensive plan amendments, one associated with the recreation master plan. That would be developing zoning ordinance amendments to implement certain programs or goals that are identified in that rec master plan. And also leaning out there on the horizon are the approvals of the groundwater sustainability plans by the groundwater sustainability agencies. And we are anticipating that we're going to have to amend our comprehensive plan to be consistent with those requirements that are all driven by the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA. I also mentioned that there are a number of programs in our comprehensive plan that we would be suggesting that we implement, particularly those regarding housing and then safety, as we update those elements. And one item that has been on our work program for a number of years is just doing comprehensive update and simplification of our comprehensive plan, because it is a robust number of documents, and it could use some tidying up, so to speak. Now, this gets to the question of possible expansions. I'm sorry.
Excuse me. Would an update of the Montecito plan be a component? Is that how time frame and review cycle?
Yes, Commissioner Miller, through the chair, that could very well be a component, yes. And one item that has been discussed or recommended that we consider is going and taking a look at area plans, looking at the comprehensive plans, particularly where there's duplication. We want to eliminate that. Where there are unique considerations that apply to one community over another, we want to preserve those. And then, of course, update these plans. Montecito definitely could use it. The community plan was adopted a number of years ago. There have been dramatic physical changes to the environment, which could bring in new considerations. So that's definitely something we could take a look at. So with regard to expansions, this is getting back to that question of if we were to receive additional resources, staffing, or consultant services, what could we do with that, with those resources? And this getting back to considerations about what we recommend, the type of funding source will determine what we recommend, how we will use those monies. So if we were to get one-time funding, we're going to utilize that funding for consultant services. We're not obviously going to try to use that for ongoing funding for staff. So assuming that we received one-time funding, what could we do with that based upon the board's requests in the past? What we are throwing out there as options for the board to consider is amending our zoning ordinances to allow more development or uses with ministerial entitlements, and or amending the zoning ordinance to update our residential and commercial zoning regulations. Those are two potential expansion projects that the board could consider adding. If we're to use consultant services, what I would be pushing for to the board, though, is that right now I'm at capacity with regard to the supervision of staff, and we would likely need a supervising planner to manage those consultant services plus other staff that are
Yeah.
now or likely come on board.
We have a couple of questions for you. First, Commissioner Sanara, then I have a comment.
Thanks. While we're on the potential division expansion, that was something that was brought to my attention in this in your staff report. It is a bit concerning that you're looking toward, there were two, amending zoning ordinances to allow more development and or / uses with the approval of ministerial land use entitlement, and updating and simplifying. And I understand where that saves a budget. It saves on a planner, it saves on tasks, but the more we get into ministerial approaches rather than discretionary, the more it affects, say, the MLUDC, et cetera, our community plan, BARs, et cetera, which, so while it basically, it is a budgetary help, I do consider it somewhat concerning. I understand it on the one hand, but on the other, it sort of cuts into discretionary, which is of great import to any community, particularly when they have a community plan as we do. So just a heads up on that, a little bit concerning for me. Thank you.
You have a comment on that question, or was that just a statement? Yes, it was, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
if Dan wants
That's
to
fine.
respond, but I feel it's a bit concerning. Thank you.
Yeah, Commissioner Police, the only thing I'd say in response to that is this has been a request that's come from multiple sources. Numerous members of the board want us to embark on this. So that's the derivation of that project. So, but with that said, I think I'll turn it over at this point to Ms. Steele for
Can
the
you
housing.
just hang on one second.
You got it.
Commissioner Keller, do you want to speak now?
Yes, I would, because I completely support Commissioner Senauer's concern. I mean, if you say that, Mr. Clement, that the board is urging you toward more ministerial approvals and decision-making, and that really goes against the grain of what we want in Montecito, because there are always considerations that need much more discretionary approach. And we have a Board of Architectural Review for Montecito that should be involved in any kind of development that affects the community. And so I would like to second her concern and concern about the going in this direction in regard to our community. And so I think that is something we need to make note of.
Thank you for your comment. I have a comment as well. You had on your list, I saw earlier, for the future, an amended comprehensive plan that included the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, SGMA. As it stands right now, is there a act that exists, and is there a practice going on? What do you want to comprehensively modify? There's something that we need to know about that? It's, go
Yeah,
ahead.
Chair Police, actually, it's a fairly straightforward project. What we're envisioning is that as the groundwater sustainability plans are adopted, for projects that are proposed within those areas, for most of them, decision makers have to make a finding, for example, that there is adequate water resources to serve the project. So what we would want to do is make sure that our comprehensive plan is updated to acknowledge that there are these plans. And then I don't want to go too far because this is a policy question, but the thought is we shouldn't be approving projects that are inconsistent with the groundwater sustainability plans. And in order to make that finding of approval, you would have to find it consistent with the plan, or you'd have to have some sort of reassurance from the respective agencies that they do have the groundwater resources and can comply with their plans and serve the project. So it'd be going into things like the ordinance and just reflecting that, going into the comprehensive plan. And our elements are out of date. They date back to the 80s in some cases, so we'd want to update them to reflect current conditions on the ground.
Okay. Commissioner Keller, you have another comment? I didn't hear that. No, I guess not. All right, so let's proceed. Thank you.
Great. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Steele. If we could just have the presentation. Great. There we go. Thank you.
All right. Hello, Chair Police and Commissioners. As Dan mentioned, my name is Jessie Steele, and we'll just dive right into the report. So the county has 3 housing projects in the works that are funded through state grants. First, the county received a total of $307,000 in SB2 grant funding to help cover the costs of the ADU ordinance amendments and the Housing Bill Implementation Project, or HBI. Of those funds, approximately $192,000 was allocated to the HBI and around $115,000 was allocated to the ADU amendments. The county also received 2 grants to help cover the costs of the 2024-2032 Housing Element Update. We received $500,000 from the Local Early Action Planning, or LEAP, grant, and around $164,000 from the Regional Early Action Planning, or REAP, grant. Next slide, please. So first we'll go over the status of the Housing Bill Implementation Project, or HBI, which is broken up into 2 phases, and it includes zoning ordinance amendments to implement various state laws that have gone into effect over the last few years. Phase 1 includes 3 amendments that will be completed in summer 2022 and adopted probably in early 2023. So first we have Low Barrier Navigation Center, or LBNC, amendments. An LBNC is a low barrier service enriched shelter that is focused on moving people into permanent housing and provides temporary living facilities while case managers connect people who are experiencing homelessness to income, public benefits, health services, shelter, and housing. The LBNC amendments will allow these facilities as a use by right in areas zoned for mixed use and non-residential zones permitting multifamily uses when certain state criteria are met. We will also be updating our density bonus provisions to reflect recent updates to state density bonus law, including new types of eligible projects and higher density bonuses for qualifying projects. And lastly, we will add provisions to the zoning ordinances to reflect the provisions of the Housing Accountability Act, or HAA. In short, the HAA limits the county's ability to reduce the density of or deny qualifying housing development projects, and it provides a streamlined permitting process for these projects. They are only subject to objective standards, conditions, and policies. Next slide, please. Phase 2 of the HBI includes 3 components.
Go back to housing accountability. Did you say it limits the ability to restrict density? I may have misheard what you said about the Housing Accountability Act.
That's okay, Commissioner Keller, through the chair. The HAA restricts the county's ability to reduce the density of proposed housing development projects or deny them unless very specific criteria are met.
So restricts the county's ability to reduce density, but I thought the county would want to not reduce density, would want to maintain more open space or the opposite of density. Am I misunderstanding that?
So the Housing Accountability Act is designed such that when a housing project comes through and it proposes a certain number of housing units, the act essentially limits the county's ability to increase the number of units that are proposed by the project. Basically, it says that very specific findings related to specific adverse impacts have to be met in order for decision makers or the county to deny or limit the number of units in a project. It is intended to incentivize and encourage higher density housing development.
I understood it as exactly the wrong way. But thank you for explaining it. I appreciate that.
No problem. So we'll go on to phase 2 of the HBI, which has 3 components, and they will be initiated in early 2023 and probably completed toward the end of 2024. The first of the 3 components are amendments to implement AB 2162, which provides a ministerial streamlined approval process for qualifying supportive housing developments. Second, staff will develop objective design and planning standards for qualifying multifamily developments. And lastly, we will develop a ministerial permit type and processing procedures for certain types of housing projects. Next slide, please. The next ongoing project we have is the ADU Local Coastal Program Amendment, or LCPA. In August 2021, staff submitted the ADU LCPA to the Coastal Commission, and in September of 2021, the Coastal Commission responded with requests for additional information, which Dan touched upon earlier, including a coastal zone-wide parking study to analyze the impacts of ADUs on coastal access parking. Staff is working with the Coastal Commission to respond to their requests, and we anticipate certification by the Commission sometime in early 2023.
I'm sorry, Theo, how does this relate to the fact that there is no staff time allocated for this process during this period?
Commissioner Keller, through the chair, this project was previously grant funded. However, we have expended almost all of our grant funds for the ADU ordinance amendments at this point. So we are waiting until next fiscal year to move the project forward and hopefully get general fund monies to continue.
So there is effort being made to coordinate with the Coastal Commission to get clarification on the ADUs within the coastal zone.
Yes, there is.
But you're just having to wait until 2023, is that it? Or worked on in 2022?
Commissioner Keller, through the chair, we're waiting until the start of the new fiscal year to undertake any serious efforts with this, aside from just coordinating here and there with the Coastal Commission. So after July 1st, we'll have a better sense of what funding is available and when we can initiate work on revising the ADU LCPA to address the Coastal Commission's concerns.
Thank you. You understand that this doesn't correspond to showing that there was no staff time allocated to this. So there is some staff time covered by grant money to cover this certification process.
Commissioner Keller, I'm sorry to interrupt. Yeah, so we should clarify. So there was previous grant money provided to us that covered prior work that Ms. Steele and others conducted on this project. But as Ms. Steele stated, that money has run out. So although we'll do a minimal amount of work just to coordinate with Coastal Commission staff, just to learn what it is that they need in order for us to finish the project. Beyond that, we're not going to do any more activity on it if or until the board gives us the money to do that. Although we're recommending right now that the board do not give us any more funding in the next fiscal year to do so, if there's no expansion of our resources, the board could do so by either taking work off another project and adding it to this, and or expanding our budget to allow for the work. But just because we're recommending that if there's no expansion of resources, that this is a project that it should be delayed, does not necessarily mean that the board is going to go with that recommendation. So I just want to clarify that.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
If we could hop to slide 6, please. Thank you. So currently, long-range planning's biggest and highest priority housing project is the 2024-2032 housing element update. The county must update its housing element every 8 years, and in pertinent part, the update must include an analysis of current and projected housing needs, an inventory of sites available for residential development, and a set of goals, policies, and programs to meet the county's housing needs, or in other words, its RENA. The county's 6th cycle RENA of 5,664 units is nearly 10 times larger than its 5th cycle RENA of 661 units. For the first time, the RENA is also divided into 2 subregions, North County and the South Coast, which the RENA for those subregions is shown on the 2 tables on this slide. As you can see in the last row of each table, the county faces a significant shortage of low and very low income units in both subregions. The state recommends that each RENA category have a buffer of 15 to 30%, which is not shown in these tables. So our potential shortfall is even greater than what is shown here. Current capacity, also shown in these tables, does not include potential units from ADUs or new state housing laws, such as SB 9. The bottom line here is that the county must rezone properties, meaning change the land use and increase the density, as part of the housing element update in order to meet its RENA. Next slide, please. Here's a quick snapshot of our housing element update timeline. First, we have the sites inventory, which we've been working on for quite some time now, and we anticipate will be completed in April of 2022. We're also going to be initiating public outreach soon, which will go on from March 2022 through adoption in early 2023. Next, we'll be working on drafting the housing element update and undergoing preliminary hearings, which will be conducted from February through October of this year. And then the EIR will closely follow that from May through December of 2022. And then lastly, that brings us to housing element adoption and adoption hearings from October 2022 through early 2023. Next slide, please. So there are over 30 housing bills that were passed in September of 2021 and became effective this year. The Board of Supervisors may direct staff to initiate zoning ordinance amendments to implement some of these bills, such as SB 9 or SB 10. We're not going to go into any detail about these bills today, but a handout has been circulated to your commission and provides a list of, I think it's 11 major bills and summaries of each one, if you're interested in learning a little bit more. Next slide. Oh, and that completes my presentation, or my portion of this presentation. I can answer any other questions you may have.
Great. And with that said, Chair Police, the only other item that we have for you are just the recommended actions, which are listed on the staff report. And if we could have the PowerPoint slide back up, that are listed on the slide.
Before we move forward, can I ask a question of Ms. Steele?
Please.
As far as developing site inventories for higher density or rezoning, how does that inventory work, and do we get to kind of see it? Where are the potential sites for higher density being reviewed? And is this kind of a global redistricting of something?
Commissioner Kupiak, through the chair. So at this time, staff has completed a draft preliminary sites inventory. And so what we've done so far is look at what number of units we can accommodate under current existing zoning, no upzoning. And we're working on that inventory, which will be made available to the public, I would say maybe within the next few weeks or so. We're still working on fine tuning some of our assumptions and methodologies for current capacity. But as far as anticipating rezones, we are currently trying to identify sites within both the North County and South Coast that can be used to accommodate higher density housing if we were to do a rezone. And there's many different strategies that we're considering to accomplish this. Upzoning certain zones, like for example, not saying this will happen, but we could go from DR 20 to DR 30, DR 40 to increase density there. We could be looking at having a policy that says that there's a minimum percentage or number of affordable units that have to be built with a mixed income project in order for it to be approved. So we're not quite sure yet. We're analyzing a lot of different options and being very, very methodical about how we go about that. And we'll be roping in the public and giving them plenty of opportunities for input starting this spring.
Yeah, my curiosity is I kind of understand how this might be looked at on a kind of county-wide basis, but do you have any specific comments that you might make about how this would specifically affect the Montecito community?
Commissioner Kupiec, through the chair, at this time, we haven't identified any specific sites in Montecito for upzoning. According to state requirements, we do need to focus our attention on high opportunity, high resource areas.
Right.
To place the housing, and Montecito could potentially be one of those areas, but we also have some other parameters that we need to work with, like parcels of a certain size that are near transit and amenities. So as to how our sites inventory efforts affect Montecito right now, I don't have too much to comment, but in general, we're looking at areas in both the South Coast and North County. We don't have any specifics yet.
Okay, thank you.
I have a comment or a question. When we look at this long-term sustainable groundwater management act, I wonder if the enhancement or the modification of like ag zoning, which would permit possible more housing in the ag 2 existing zoning law, so that we would be able to maybe affordably use less water because agriculture takes so much water. Is there looking at trade-offs? Do we get if we need more housing and yet we want to reduce our consumption of water? Wouldn't that facilitate that kind of thinking, or is that something that's too much in the weeds to talk about?
Chair Felice and commissioners, the water supply and availability does play a role in practically in how housing is built. In theory, and with the drafting of this housing element, state HCD, the Department of Housing and Community Development, doesn't take water availability into too much consideration. Anecdotally, what we've heard from other jurisdictions that have, for example, water moratoriums or difficulty in getting water from their water district, the state doesn't really care anymore about that. They basically tell jurisdictions to find sites, find ways to build housing despite water restrictions. So at this time, it's something we'll be analyzing as part of the housing element because we know it affects housing. It's not something that we can really use as justification to say more or less housing will be built based on water availability.
Well, I guess what my point was, you could encourage a reduction in the use of water on agricultural properties if there was certain modifications for zoning that would allow for more housing. That's just my point, but it's just a statement, I guess. Anyway, thank you.
Great, Chair Felice. This pretty much wraps up our presentation. We just have recommended actions. There are 3 of them. That is to receive the report that we provided to you. You can provide us with any sort of recommendations that you would like us to present to the board for our consideration, for the board's consideration, excuse me. And then finally, determine that your actions today don't constitute a project that's subject to CEQA pursuant to the state CEQA guidelines, section 15378B5. And of course, I'm summarizing the recommended actions. And thank you very much for your patience with us.
Yes, let's go back to Commissioner Keller.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. It was comprehensive and you were very patient with our questions. So before we move on to recommended actions, I'm hoping we can have some discussion about any recommendations that we might like to make to include in our action. And I specifically would like to incorporate what Mr. Kleeman referred to as the possibility that the board might create an ad hoc committee to look into these issues that need to be resolved with the Coastal Commission on an executive level, because that seems to be what is hanging up progress on both the ADUs and the short-term rentals. And both of those are issues of specific importance and impact on Montecito. So I hope that's summarizes what the suggestion was, that we request or that we recommend that the Board of Supervisors create an ad hoc committee to approach the agreement with the Coastal Commission.
Let me,
Yes,
if I
sorry.
can interrupt, I think
Sure.
we're kind of heading into deliberations here.
Right,
So before we do that, I think we need to take public comment.
yes.
Oh, okay, sorry, but this is not, this is part of their recommendation. So if we could come back to this, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay, shall we have public comment then, David?
All right, we do have one speaker. Sharon Byrne.
Hello, Montecito Planning Commission. Thank you very much, staff, for the presentation today. Very interesting. Just a couple of things. Would still really love to see Senate Bill 9 prioritized in the county's work program, not just on behalf of Montecito. Many districts in the county would like to see the few remaining local protections that you have modified into an ordinance so that you have at least something on the books, and a lot of jurisdictions have done this. And then second, I would like to challenge the notion that the only place we can create housing is by densifying. You know, there were some bills that came through the legislature last year. Unfortunately, they failed, but they're going to get reintroduced this year that would have enabled rezoning for things like dead retail spaces, right? Or vacant office spaces, or large big box spaces. And those make a good place to go get housing where there isn't any today. And then second, I would like to mention too that the Mass Transit District owns a very large lot off of El Sueño Road. And that lot would have been perfect for affordable housing, which would have been their target demographic. That's going to be used for luxury and market rate housing. So I think, we need to be thoughtful about the kind of policies that we pursue as a county in terms of where are good opportunity zones for housing and the use of public lands. And thank you very much for the considerable amount of work that went into today's report and the efforts that you have made to advocate that we get Senate Bill 9 and Senate Bill 10 ordinances. Thank you.
And Ms. Byrne was our last speaker.
Okay, going back, I have a question. Do we have to make this decision today regarding what we want to recommend? It seems like we could take this under review and discuss this further. But I do respect the comment that Commissioner Keller mentioned regarding the ad hoc suggestion, but so let's go back to that. I'm just not certain whether we're prepared today to make these recommendations. Anybody else have a comment on that?
Well, it was my understanding that we were under a timeline because this goes before the County Planning Commission and then goes before the Board of Supervisors. And it appears to me that we don't have the option of, or the luxury of taking more time on this. Is that correct? Whoever can answer to that, is that correct? That we do need to act upon this today?
Well, it seems strange if we have something that we've been looking at for 5 years and didn't come up with a conclusion on that we have 5 hours. But if you're prepared to make comments, then any of the commissioners want to, we could start deliberating, I guess.
Recommendations is what we are allowed to propose. And I think that the comments of Sharon Byrne were very, very well thoughtful and well taken. So I first would like to recommend the Board of Supervisors create an ad hoc committee to look at approaching the Coastal Commission on an executive level, such that these issues regarding affordable, short-term rentals and accessory dwelling units can be resolved, so we can have clarification as they affect the community of Montecito. I secondly would like to recommend that they prioritize creating ordinances that would address the impact of Senate Bill 9 and 10, because these have great impact on the entire community, the entire county. And thirdly, I am very appreciative of her comment about finding more creative uses of dead retail and space, such that if we look at potential locations for affordable housing, we move outside the box and look at other options that might be available. So those are my 3 recommendations.
Well, I know in the final recommendation you made, there is ongoing negotiations that the county is having with the particular hotel in District 3 or 2 or both. And so there are activities that are going towards what you're suggesting. However, it's not comprehensive, and I don't know of any in Montecito that have been proposed.
Thank you, but I think that our support of that kind of creative and much more the creative thinking and possible uses outside the just higher increasing density is a good thing for us to support, because I think that's a very good very good way to go. So I just would like to be supportive of that. Thank you.
Okay. So Commissioner Sinauer, do you comment on this?
Yeah, yes, I support Commissioner Keller's proposal to recommend those 3 areas. I would like to also align it with budget. We can offer to the board that they prioritize, but it has to be funded. So we have to link the funding to our recommendations, and I think that's an imperative, that it's just not wishful. It has to be backed up by funding. So yes, and if there could be, regarding a ministerial sort of process to be advanced as the process that would be prioritized, I think somehow we should frame it and craft it that that ministerial, I believe it's a ministerial development addition or something, potential division expansion, that under that and the language has to be simplified, of course, but I think there should be a cautionary asterisk about proceeding to to more ministerial vis-a-vis the existing discretionary approach. So somehow some wordsmith can work on that. So that would be my only addition. Thanks.
Okay, so we have some ideas. We got to get this into a form, but let's go back to the young men on the commission. No disrespect, Bob, but at first, Marshall.
I thank Chair. My only add to that would be in my mid-40s, so that that kind of puts all of us a little bit older than I'd like to be, if I'm the young one. The where I would like to direct, I agree with the of Commissioner Senator. I think they were both well taken. I think that there's a basket of problems here that need attention, and my view is that I would like to go in with ask that the County Board of Supervisors look at funding from the general fund on a Montecito-oriented long-term planning. That what we hear is we've got kind of traffic jam a la San Ysidro Road on a late noon kind of moment, where we've got the ADU, we've got coastal resiliency, we've got short-term vacation rental. We are now trying to stack on SB 9, SB 10, and as I mentioned in my own comment, we can see coming down the road this direction a review of the Montecito Community Plan. There's a lot here. None of this I get. We are a community of 9,000 people in a county of 400,000 people. None of this rises to the level of being county level important. And so I totally both understand and respect how Plowman and Mr. Clinton's prioritizing of this are. Their job is to look at this at the county level. but we are a significant fund source for the county as in terms of the general fund. And the whole reason this exists, that Montecito Planning Committee, is the idea to address the particular needs of this community. The analogy I would draw is that in Malibu, in LA County, Malibu has become a city. But if Malibu had its own commission in the fashion that we do, there would never be a Malibu priority to being important for all of LA County. Instead, cityhood was their solution. I'm not here advocating for cityhood, but part of the struggle I believe this is encountering is the inability to have dedicated resources to this list of questions that we are talking about. And so I am in favor of advocating for more money for these projects. I would be pushing for a recommendation request to the County Board of Supervisors that goes a step further, that the assessment of a dedicated Montecito area long-term planning source, that we wouldn't be having these fights every year discussing whether or not having this reprioritization question every year, that a Montecito planning resource would focus on Montecito specific questions and would not impact the large issues that the long-term planning department has. And so I am agreeing with everything that Commissioner Keller, Commissioner Senhauer said. I guess I'm trying, this is a little bit holistic and long-term of ask for it, be looking for these things in conjunction with.
Marshall, I'm not hearing you clearly enough. I don't know if anybody else is having trouble.
Is it, where did I cut off, or am I?
Well, it's just spotty all the way through.
Marshall, I think if you cut your video,
okay,
your bandwidth, and just, yes, it might be better.
Okay? So where I was, do I sound better now?
Well, keep trying.
Okay. I don't know where I come for if this is not the right moment to do it, but bottom line is, I think go in and ask for these things to be prioritized, but to be asking for staffing that is in addition to current staffing, but staffing that is long-term positions, so that we're not arguing about this on a case basis, short-term vacation rentals, ADUs, SB 9, but we're arguing for a resource that addresses all of these things as they come along and will keep coming along.
Excuse me, may I could hear most of what Mr. Miller said, and may I summarize and respond?
Please.
Because Mr. Miller is suggesting a more holistic approach, that rather than do it piecemeal by asking for the individual things that Commissioner Senhauer and I have mentioned, that we request funding that would specifically address the needs of Montecito in regard to both these individual items as well as our community plan. And I just have to say that unfortunately, that makes absolute sense. I think you're absolutely right that that's what should happen. But I know that historically, there's been a great deal of resistance on the part of the board and of many people in specifically North County to treat Montecito as anything but being entitled in requesting special favors, despite the fact that we provide an unbalanced share of the county's revenue. There's a great resistance to giving Montecito any special consideration. So my reason for idolizing these is because I think the only chance of our getting attention to these items is if we don't make it something that's a large Montecito consideration, but rather just resolution of some specific items that do impact Montecito in regard to the ADUs and the short-term rentals, and some items that affect county-wide in regard to SB 9 and 10 and the additional funding that is needed to address these issues. So with all due respect, Commissioner Miller, I think your approach makes sense, but I don't think it has a chance of being supported on the county level.
Okay, so we go back to Mr. Kubiak, please. Bob, can
I
you?
have to, I kind of agree with what's been said. I mean, I think we have very specific issues in Montecito that don't get prioritized in the vast number of things that, I mean, we're low hanging fruit for high density housing. I mean, we're not a target. I mean, we don't have sites that are available for that. But we do have issues with SB9, and we do have issues with how ADUs move through a ministerial process rather than our traditional, everybody really gets to look at, the things that affect our community. So, I'm more interested in how the county is going to focus in their work plan on those specific items that are going to really affect Montecito to make sure they're covered. I mean, I'm not saying those other issues aren't important. They're just, as it's been said, I mean, we're a larger revenue stream for the county. I'd like to make sure that, our concerns are, met with that same level of,
Yeah. Well, Bob, what do you think of the idea of, or anybody else? We have this Montecito Association. And for example, Doss Williams and Caltrans went to speak to them last week. I mean, they play a big role in the effect of things that are changed in Montecito. And I just wonder if, should we not be working collectively with the association to put forth, like we're talking about right now, our suggestions, or is that something we don't have to? What do you think?
I mean, I think the association, Sharon's listening to what we're saying here.
Right.
I think that, reporting back to the Montecito Association, I mean, I think the pressure of political will. I mean, if Montecito makes a lot of noise, then Montecito gets some attention, I think,
Well, I was just thinking, if we're going to say something right now, I would like to, I know Sharon did speak, but was there something specific that she wanted to add to what was said by Commissioner Keller?
Excuse me, Mr. Caliche, the Montecito Association is a membership organization.
I
We
see.
are
Yes, right.
a semi-judicial body, and it's great to have their input and support, but we are the people that should be speaking for the community of Montecito to the board. And if there is supplemental support from the association or from individuals, that's wonderful. But this is our opportunity to make recommendations directly to.
Yes, I understand. I understand that. I just want to make sure that we are inclusive in our recommendations and that we hear what people are saying, in particular, a group that represents, 15%, 20% by virtue of their membership of the whole community. But you are correct. We do speak. So Commissioner Denauer, do you have a comment?
Yeah, yes, I think I concur with Commissioner Keller. We are, the MA is quite distinct as a membership organization, and there should be no collaboration between MPC and the MA. I think it's, I'm sure council would advise us regarding that. And I think what we heard from the MA today, I take it Ms. Byrne was representing the MA, although she didn't proceed her comments regarding that. I think so far at this point, our priority list of, I believe it's 5, includes the MA's comments. I would like to, I have a hard stop at 1, just FYI. But I unfortunately also understand Commissioner Miller's global sort of consideration about funding. But I do believe that it's imperative that we do not go down that road. I think the priority should be as we so state, but not a carve out for the Montecito community. That will go nowhere. So
yeah.
Anyway, those are my comments. And if someone, I think I think there's more comments, but if the language, I think we need to see the language for the recommendations to
Right.
the board.
Okay, so Marshall, you have one more comment yet before we get maybe Vice Chair Keller to talk to David, maybe, and then have something written up or something.
I want to say I appreciate the comments of Commissioner Keller and Commissioner Sennhauser. In my day job, I work a lot in the North County. I'm not unfamiliar with North County opinions of Montecito. Yes, that is something I'm intimately familiar with. That said, I am a firm believer that we are, within the context of Santa Barbara County government, the advocacy voice for Montecito. And so while I appreciate kind of approach the reasonableness of moderation, my bias is to go in and ask for everything asking for this in a comprehensive fashion, with the understanding that the compromise position may land in just prioritizing these individual items. But I don't believe that these items are the end of the problem we're speaking of. I believe that a redo of the Montecito community plan, that the pressures statewide for greater housing density are only dial up, and Montecito's either appropriate absorption of those or rejection of those, if possible, are going to look very different than they do in Orchid or other places. And that's not a bad thing. This is a diverse county. And so, but I think that the pressure to get it, to do it long-term planning way for Montecito is a greater need for this for Montecito farm. And so I take both commissioners' comments very seriously, and I appreciate my even-handedness on this topic, in pushing on it. I'm a believer that this is a moment for the aggressive expression of our interests. That may result in compromised positions and not getting the piece, but that to the Board of Supervisors, that this is a need both now and in the future.
Okay, so Donna, you have a comment back on this? Commissioner Senar? No? Okay. Commissioner Keller?
Yes, once again, just to address, I fully respect and appreciate Mr. Miller's position. I think we would have greater success in getting the support of our individual supervisor, who would be in a better position to present to the board our need and our being deserving of a slightly bigger pot to deal with Montecito's specific issues, since because of the contribution that Montecito makes to the pot in general. But for right now, I would like to go ahead and articulate the recommendations, because like Commissioner Sennauer, I unfortunately have a hard stop. This was supposed to be a very short meeting, and I have a commitment at 12:30. So if I may articulate the recommendations that we've discussed, may I put that into a motion? I would like to submit, I'm sorry, I believe it's 4 recommendations. One is that the Board of Supervisors create an ad hoc committee to deal with the issues at the Coastal Commission level on an executive level, so that the problems regarding the ADU and the short-term rental can be resolved, so that we can have a final determination as they affect Montecito. The second recommendation would be for the pursuance of zoning ordinances that would deal with the impacts of Senate Bills 9 and 10 as they affect the county. The third would be to look for alternative and creative options for affordable housing that don't only rely on increased density. And the fourth would be providing the funding to make all of these projects feasible and achievable.
Yes, I would like to see how we can get in the ministerial vis-a-vis discretionary.
Sorry, that was the fifth one. And thank you, Donna. May I articulate what you
Yes,
said?
please.
The fifth one is that the Planning Commission strongly supports the retention of the discretionary decision-making as opposed to an increased level of ministerial decision-making.
So I'd like to ask staff, was that clear enough? Could we put that to paper, or how do you want to
I'm
do this?
hoping somebody was taking notes. I can reiterate if necessary.
David? Are you still there?
I'm still writing.
Should we take a break, David? Of I think we can afford 5 minutes or 10. Would that be helpful? And then for you to wordsmith this?
Are you, we're still there, David?
I think we got it.
Oh, okay.
All right. You put it up so we can see it, or?
Oh, no, well, I have it just written in my notes. You want us to type it out?
No,
Right?
no. I just think that if we want to be able to memorialize this, we need to, I thought, need to see it, but if not, I'm good with what just been said.
I leave it to you to.
Well, why not read it back?
Yeah, read it back to us. That's a good idea.
Okay. I'll do
Good
my
luck.
best. We're okay.
You may need to abbreviate something. Go ahead.
Commissioner Keller's motion was for the first recommendation was for the Board of Supervisors to create an ad hoc committee approach on the executive level to engage with the Coastal Commission to address issues such as the issues of ADUs and short-term rentals, the pursuance of ordinance amendments addressing the impacts of SB 9 and 10 as they affect the county, the find more alternative creative ways to look for areas for housing, including, I think that specifically in the context was including Ms. Burns' comments regarding the use of dead retail spaces, but that's just an aside. And then also,
that was specifically other than increasing density.
other than increasing density, thank you.
Create ways to increase opportunities for affordable housing that we're not reliant completely on
Affordable housing.
density.
Got it. Okay, and then we talked about the linking those three to funding. And then also to express or make a recommendation to retain discretionary making rather than the expansion of ministerial decision making. And that one was a little bit, if we can maybe work on that one a little bit.
Actually, Chair Police, how about this? The Montecito Planning Commission does not support the ordinance amendments regarding allowing more ministerial development uses, the potential expansion project that we discussed.
That sounds better.
Great.
Thank you.
Good.
And then, thank you, David. And then is this a ranking as far as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for us? Or in other words, we don't want to be assumptive that it's ranking for priority if it's not.
I don't think we're doing that.
Well,
I don't think that staff made that assumption, no.
Okay.
Yeah. And
So our okay.
I'm sorry, just to clarify really quick, Commissioner Keller through the chair, what we will be doing is we'll be presenting your recommendations directly to the board. So they'll receive that and for consideration. But.
Thank you. So the only thing that is linked is that the funding needs to be present for the ordinance amendments for ordinances for SB 9 and 10, and for the ad hoc committee might not create any additional funding, but that the funding for all of our recommendations needs to be incorporated. I think that's the only thing that's linked, is that if there is any additional need for funding, it needs to be provided to make these other recommendations occur.
Yes.
So how do we proceed from here? Do you want us to vote on this or?
Yes.
I think
If,
that,
if the commission is comfortable with as the recommendations as presented by Mr. Villalobos, that was part of my motion, which was to receive the report, to draft these 5 recommendations to the Board of Supervisors in regard to the report, and to determine that it is not subject to CEQA. So of the 3 recommended actions that we've been working on, the second one, which are their recommendations, but my motion includes the other 2.
Okay, Commissioner Kupiak, do you have a comment?
I have kind of a question. It's a comment and a question.
Okay.
We've listened to a number of previous reports. I mean, about housing, about some of the zoning issues that are involved, especially as it affects ADUs, and now we're moving into the SB9 issue. I have to admit, I've never noticed that from a staff perspective that there's been a predisposition to move towards ministerial approvals from what our standard formats would be. I mean, I do find that, ADUs are the new full-blown guest house of Montecito. I mean, there are lots of ways that type of housing is being used, which is different here than it may be in other places. I mean, it is providing some form of additional housing. That's not always the case. And I know that there's been this issue that we've listened to a number of times, that the county is somewhat hamstrung by the law coming from the state of California. There are only so many limited things that we are capable of doing in terms of stopping or, changing how that ministerial approval for those types of projects occur. So the caveat to this is really, if there are less ministerial approvals and more review as far as SB9 type of projects or ADUs, I see county staff's budget kind of ballooning out of control as it regards to both, the management of the MBAR and the management of us in terms of how many kinds of projects might happen. I don't know that it's going to happen. I would just bring that comment. I don't know how much latitude we actually have with the law for housing as being mandated by the state of California. We've seen this in how the ADUs are dealt with. Setbacks are less, ministerial approvals are automatic. I mean, it's not in our control. I don't know how much control we actually have. I think that's more our organization making a comment, and places like the Montecito Association and people going to the polls to change how the politics of California might be dealt with in terms of dealing with this particular subject. But, I mean, we can make a lot of proposals. I just want people to be aware that I just don't know how much actual restraint there can be applied to the kind of ministerial approvals that are being mandated by the state.
Excuse me, may I respond, Mr. Kupiak?
Sure.
Because this was in regard to the potential expansions
Right.
that were recommended by the staff.
Right.
And the potential expansions recommended by the staff had to do with zoning ordinance amendment options, and their recommendation that more development or uses be done ministerially. And so this recommendation from the MPC was intended to indicate our support, our non-approval of that recommendation, that specific
No,
recommendation.
I agree. I agree. I mean, we are the community we are because we have controls. We make
Well,
sure.
let's
things
just stick
happen
with
a
this
certain
then.
quality.
Bob, I know you're kind of being realistic, but I think we need to be idealistic in the point of at least, providing the information of how we position ourselves.
Okay.
So
I agree.
let's stay with this thing. Is there a comment by Commissioner Miller before we go further?
Yeah, I am not opposed, just so that it's not a surprise when it comes for a vote. I'm not opposed to greater ministerial review recommendations that staff is recommending in terms of the larger county. I think this is drawing Montecito has the resources of MBAR that other places do not, and it's paid for by permit and development fees. So as worded, I would not be supporting this. And so I am happy to, I think that I'd really like to strongly emphasize that the funding requests that are coming for, that are being asked for the ongoing work of the 4 topics, or at least 2 of the 4 topics, that be clear that we are asking for additional funding, that we don't expect county staff to be doing this. Where I think we will really piss off the North County is if we think our initiatives jump ahead of some of county-wide initiatives. I think we need to be very clear that we are saying this is funding that's coming from the general fund, that's coming from Montecito, that is in addition to the planning work that the county planning staff is doing county-wide. And so I'd like to wordsmith that topic a little bit. I'm hearing people don't want dedicated resource here. I can respect that. I don't agree with it, but I respect it. But I want to make it very clear that it's additional to and not bumping some other project down the priority list.
Okay. All right, let's go back.
As a motion, I did make a motion and I'm willing to amend that motion to be more clear that the funding for to implement our recommendations be additional funding from the general plan, not taken from other projects that are currently being funded. Would that help you, Mr. Miller? Okay, then please, Mr. Villalobos, if you could make sure that the recommendation or the request, the recommendation for funding to implement these other recommendations be additional funding from the general plan, from the general budget, not from taken away from other projects that are being put forth.
We got it.
Okay, Bob, one more thing. You have
Oh,
a,
I'm sorry. I meant to lower my hand. Sorry.
okay, so do we need a second on this motion?
Yes, I second.
All right, Donna, thank you. All right, David, you want to take a roll call?
Commissioner Keller,
Aye.
Commissioner Miller,
Aye.
Commissioner Kupiec,
Aye.
Commissioner Sunauer,
Aye.
and Chair Palice.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
Now, I'm assuming we have this, you know, completely wordsmithed out by now. Is that an assumption I can make before maybe I was premature with that call for a vote, but we're all good? Okay,
I think David has the language.
perfect. All right, I think that, covers everything. I want to thank the staff. Was very informative. The presentations were great. And again, Jeff, get well. And I guess we'll see each other next month. Any comments from anybody else? We good?
We're good.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.